Hey, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the December Council meeting for the town of Bassendean. And I would first like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I think all of us in this room can appreciate the really important role that the Noongar people have played in our community, and we're very grateful for that. Before we start tonight, I just wanted to have a bit of a chat. So last week, as people would know, we've been having our briefing sessions in the community. Last week we had a second one, which was in the Youth Services building. Our wonderful youth staff spoke about some of the great work they're doing in our community. And for those of you who weren't aware that we had this initiative, it's basically a way that we're wanting to provide opportunities for people to engage differently with council in less formal settings, hopefully attract people that don't usually come along to formal council meetings. And it's a way that we're hoping to build more positive connections between council and people that live in the town. So last week it was a pretty disappointing experience. There was some really what I would consider to be appalling behaviours from people who were in attendance. So it's unfortunate that I need to start tonight's meeting in this way, but it needs to be made really clear that that behaviour is not acceptable and it won't be tolerated. So what that means is that people who are disrespectful to our staff will be asked to sit down. They will no longer have a voice. People in the audience who are making comments that are muttering about things, that is also not tolerated. We ask people to engage in a way that is positive, that's going to keep the lines of communication open. We as councillors and staff sit here and listen respectfully to the views that are put forward, and we expect the same thing from people in the community who attend our sessions. So just so people are aware, our meetings are conducted under our local law, which is our standing orders. So under 6.18, which is the prevention of disturbance, this is what it says. So a person addressing the council shall extend due courtesy and respect to the council and the processes under which it operates, and shall comply with any direction by the presiding member. So that means any instruction that I give people in the room needs to be complied with. It also says a person observing a meeting shall not create a disturbance at a meeting by interrupting or interfering with the proceedings, whether by expressing approval or dissent, by conversing or by any other means. Now this may sound a bit harsh, but our staff are very professional, they are highly skilled. I will not tolerate people bullying our staff, making critical comments of our staff in public. By all means, if anybody has a concern with any of our staff members, our CEO would be happy to hear that at another time, but this is not the setting for that to occur. Now, I know everybody in this room here is going to be on their best behaviour tonight. You're all wonderful community members, but like with my children sometimes, the boundaries need to be made very clear. So we welcome everybody's input tonight, but it's really important that it's done in a respectful way. So now that's out of the way, we're going to move on to item 2 on the agenda, which is public question time. I know there's quite a few people who have things that they want to speak about tonight. So just to make it clear, the first part is public question time. So if you have a specific question that you want to ask, it doesn't need to be about an item on the agenda. This is your opportunity. And then once all of the questions have been exhausted, then there is statements by members of the public. So if you have something you particularly want to say about an item on tonight's agenda, that is your opportunity then. Okay? So first of all, questions by members of the public. So if there is anybody that would like to ask a question, I'd ask you to raise your hand and I'll call you in turn to come to the microphone and address the council. Are there any questions? Yes, come forward, thank you. So if you could state your name and your address for the minute, please.
Yep. Genevieve Berry, 36 Anzac Terrace, Bassendean. My question is regarding item 11.1, which is a motion being put forward in relation to the local planning scheme 10. My question is, why are we considering such a motion at this point in time? My reason for asking this is, A, it's not an accurate representation of what was in, sorry, I shouldn't have run over to the It's not an accurate representation of what was in the summary report 4.2 of the Bassendean Our Future report, which really and truly reflects consultation. Secondly, it preempts Council's consideration of a proper overall plan in relation to that. And thirdly, it actually promotes itsy-bitsy planning, which is one of the things which will work against increasing density for ourselves. So, thank you.
Thank you for your question. Just to answer, councils are able to put forward notices of motion at any time, so this has come forward as a notice of motion, which is why it's on the agenda. Thanks for raising your concerns. I'm sure everybody will take them on board. Other questions? Yes?
I'm standing here.
Do you want to come to the microphone so it can be heard? Sorry.
Want you?
You know the
As Franfield 15 River Street, I'm also on 11.1. I'd like to know the boundaries of Success Hill.
So, I don't think there is a definition. Luke, is there a formal definition of Success Hill?
Through you, Madam Mayor, no, there's not. I think in the conversations that were occurring last week, the term Success Hill was probably referencing the area bound by Guildford Road, Lord Street, the river and the railway line, I'd suggest, but that is an anecdotal kind of artificial reference. There is no particular Success Hill as a geographical area.
Well, that was my inference from 11.1 here. I have no idea what these tables mean. Sorry. So I think we need to find out what it all means first. And I think you've got to be aware of the only one option out of each area. How difficult it is at various times, and to put a lot of development there needs good planning. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other questions at this stage before people move on to comments? Yes, Mr. Kay.
Thank you, Your Worship. Bruce Kay, 11 Earls Ferry Court, Bassendean. I have two questions relating to item 10.11 and 11.1. 10.11 is the lease agreement for the men's shed. Some months ago I had a conversation with a councillor, and as I recall that conversation, it said that the men's shed was a joint use community facility. That's as I remember it. But when I read the lease agreement, there's a provision for the men's shed to lease the building, but there's no requirement for them to actually lease it. So am I right in thinking that it's a joint use community facility, or is it not?
Yeah, there's certainly provision there for a community space. So we actually just visited the men's shed this afternoon. So a large portion of it is reserved for the men's shed, but there's a provision at the front for community space, which can actually be subleased by the men's shed group.
Okay, my question was, is there any obligation on them to lease it?
Sorry. I'm not sure whether you've seen the update in the agenda since the briefing session. So there's been some additional information which was included in the proposed lease, and it says the lessee will not unnecessarily refuse an application to hire out the premises or any part thereof. So not so much a lease, but the opportunity for other community groups has been proposed through that clause.
Thank you, Your Worship. I had only read the previous version of it. My second question relates to item 11.1, which is the LPS 10 amendment. Not so much the amendment. I'm very interested that the previous motion that Council passed is for a report to come to Council in February. I'm sure you're aware of my dismay at the incredible delays we've had with LPS 10 amendment. We were supposed to have all be finished in May. I would be very concerned that this report that comes to Council in February is full and adequate so that Council can make a decision on the night and press on. I can see if the report comes and is not complete, Council might call for more information and we'll have further months of delay. So
Can I
what
maybe
I
just
would
ask-
like and ask a question, to make sure the report's fulsome, that perhaps yourself and the CEO review the draft of that report some 2 weeks before the meeting, and if you consider that it's not full enough, then it's brought up to scratch by the time it gets to the meeting.
Can I just ask, are you able to give a bit of an overview about what you're anticipating presenting in February?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The report during February will basically set out the steps that need to be taken to actually complete the process. It's not intended to be a report that will allow Council to make any material decisions about the strategy, the scheme or the framework more generally. It is simply to bring Council up to speed with what has happened up until now and what the remaining steps are and who has responsibility for those steps.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, my point is, do need that report to have those steps in it. If there's a cost associated with any of those steps, it needs to be identified so that Council can make a full decision at the February meeting and that we can get on and get the scheme amendment finished.
I think I agree with you. I'm sure other councillors in the room do as well. And I know you're frustrated, and there's frustration that is shared that it has taken longer than expected, but we're wanting to move it forward, I can assure you.
I'm sure Your Worship is aware that there's considerable concern throughout the community about the increasing delays and not getting anywhere, so yeah, we do need to fix it.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes.
Lisa Last, 82B West Road, Bassendean. I have a question about the latest draft of the Urge policy and guidelines.
So just before you continue, I'm not sure if you're aware, but that policy was on the briefing agenda, and when myself and others looked at it, we realised that there'd been, in the time between when it was last presented to Council and now, there'd been some changeover in staff, and the version that was included in the briefing session didn't reflect what Council had previously endorsed. So it's been withdrawn so that can be addressed. So I'm not sure if that's what you were about to speak to, but you might notice it's not actually on tonight's agenda because there needs to be some more conversation to make sure that the current staff have a clear understanding of where Council's intention was. So it's unfortunate, but that's the situation that we're currently in.
No, that's great news. I guess it's not a question now, it's a comment. But that's wonderful. And maybe I don't need to ask the question.
Feel free to ask.
Basically, it's just, the bench seating and the little libraries and fruit trees were not included in that draft. So,
yes.
And that you've answered.
Yeah,
why
that concerned me too. Yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
Jacobson, Spartan Parade, Bassendean. I've got a question regarding item 10.6, which is the site. It says something about the contaminated site being the issue being dealt with. Now, what does that exactly mean? What does that mean?
Who's best placed to speak to this? Would this be yourself? Thank you, Mr. Gibson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The site has been remediated. We've got an environmental report that confirms that as such. We have recently lodged that with the DWER for them to ideally authorise the removal of the memorial on title. But ultimately the site has been remediated recommended to be classified as unrestricted, and that's currently with the Department for consideration.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, any further questions? Yes.
Moss Johnson, Barton Parade, Bassendean. Just in relation to, where are we? Item 10.5, the finalisation of town planning scheme number 4. I'd just like to know, were any of the other adjoining owners to 27 Highland Street asked whether they were interested in a possible acquisition or part acquisition of 27 Highland Street as an access, or was only the landowners of 29 Highland Street and 100 and whatever it is Carnegie Street? who
I-
wrote the letter?
Yeah.
Were they
I
the
don't
only ones
believe
quoted?
so. Do you have? No? I believe there's only been a communication with the owners of the other Highland Street and Carnegie property.
No, but the Watson Street properties that back
No.
onto the Highland Street property that can also provide access?
I don't believe so.
Okay, I think that that's really important because I know from personally that two of them are interested in that's a possibility. And just as a general comment, when considering item, the completion of Scheme 4A, we do need to recognise that the value of the environment is really difficult to put in financial terms. Balancing the books in purely land value in terms of residential is just completely wrong. And in 30, 40 years, we're going to look back if we do, sell particular parts of that land rather that is currently not developed for the sake of balancing a complete, something that's not what the intent was to begin with when it was set up in the 80s. Thanks.
Thank you, and thanks for bringing the Watson Street property's interest to our attention as well. Other questions? Okay, so in that case we'll move on to statements. So if there's anybody that would like to speak to a particular agenda item, now is your chance. Yes, Mrs. Siddell?
It's Carol Seidel of 55 Broadway, Bassendean. I wish to make a statement regarding item 11-1 on the agenda for the local planning scheme. It sounds like the motion is asking the council to accept high density development in Success Hill is okay, when we know that it would severely impact on the people who live there and know will create serious increased traffic issues and access. I'm told that the main roads have already said no to any increased traffic development that is not on the agenda for the government in the foreseeable future. So, main roads has already said no, and here we are just thinking there might be something to consider that we could do high development. We don't want another similar land court proposal that would alarm the community. And while we have the developers thinking that's about financial gain and not considering the impact on the community in the long term and the consequences because of that decision. So that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure there's someone else that has something to say. Yes.
Madam Mayor, I'm not sure whether this is really on the agenda tonight, but in my running around and collecting things about quite serious implications, I've come across a news report. It was made on the 23rd of September this year, and it was basically 500 scientists talking about climate change. And they put a proposal to the Paris Convention, put out a press release to all the major corporations, and the lack of response has been resounding. And I'd like to present this paper to Council. There is no climate emergency is the heading. And some of the information that has been put forward lately, and I quote from a professor at one of the major universities in climate change in America, the models just become useless pieces of junk, or worse, as they can produce gravely misleading output when they are used for climate forecasting. Basically, it's not saying very much at all, but in point of fact, it's like a clap of thunder. If you need further sources, I can source them for you, but I'll just present those two pieces and that report, which has only come out recently.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
You're right, that wasn't on the agenda, but we appreciate the information. Other statements? Yes, Ms Jacobson?
Margaret Jacobson, Spartan Frank Bassendean. I've just got a comment about the proposal of the shade sail at the skate park. Personally, I'd like to see shade being provided by trees. I understand that there may be issues with certain kinds of trees that drop bits and pieces on the ground, but ideally that would be what's providing shade. And the idea that a shade sail might have anti-climb spikes on it, on the poles, to me sends a message that we're basically saying that the community isn't trusted to behave itself, and to me that's a really negative thing to be putting out there as a message. Regarding item 10.6, which is also about the Eden site, it mentions in the agenda about retaining trees, that the council would like to see some of the more significant trees on the site retained. I do feel that after recent events at the Mayholman Drive site, that it's all well and good to say we would really like you guys to retain some trees, but I do think that rather than doing that, you need to actually put something in writing that needs to be part of a condition of sale and a condition of development approval, that the trees are not just retained but protected during development so that they don't suffer from the development process itself. I just think that we could be learning a bit from some of the recent errors and maybe have a bit more foresight going forward.
Thank you. Who's next? No? Okay, just let me turn this off so that my timer doesn't go off in the middle of the next section. Okay, so next we're moving on to attendances, apologies and applications for leave. So unfortunately we have an apology from Phil Adams, our Executive Manager for Infrastructure, who's had to take unexpected leave. I believe Councillor McWilliam, you wanted to apply for some leave?
Yes, 4 weeks from starting this Friday.
So from Friday the 20th?
20th, yes.
Until?
The last Monday in January.
Okay. Okay, do we have Councillor to move that leave? Councillor Quinton, seconded. Councillor Ganjel, all those in favour? Carried unanimously. And also just to note that our CEO is also on leave from this Friday until the 3rd of February, and Paul White will be acting in the CEO's role. So moving on now to deputations. So I've had 2 people request deputations this evening, both of them on item 11.1, which is the notice of motion about local planning scheme number 10. So first, if Avril White would like to come and speak to council. So please come and join councillors at the table. You can take a seat. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. Avril White, 81 North Road, Bassendean, and I'm here to speak for the to make a comment on item 11.1 and to ask councillors to try to have an understanding of how such a long period of no action by the Bassendean Council in relation to increasing the densities for some of the areas in Bassendean, the effect that it's had on its senior citizens that have been living in the area for so long. I think there are many reasons for supporting this motion, but I'm going to address how this motion will affect the older members of the community. I'm the only child. I was an only child born shortly after the Second World War. And it's been the fate of women of my generation to endure a lot of discrimination during our younger years, which have had a profound effect upon our ability to have enough capital to fund our retirement. I began working when I was 15 at the ANZ Bank. Right beside me was a young man who started at the same time. He got a third as much money as I did again. He was invited to join the superannuation fund. I was ineligible to join the super fund because I was female. When I chose to get married, I had to resign from my job because they did not employ married women. That was just the beginning of the series of things that have happened to me throughout my life, which have caused me to be further behind than I believe I should be. So with very little in the way of super, it became evident to me that I would have to find another way to fund my retirement. So I thought that if I bought a property which had enough land that in the future would be able to be subdivided, because I would have not enough super, that I would be able to subdivide that land, and that would give me an income for the later part of my life. The property that I bought, with the help of my father, he and I sold our 2 properties and bought a property in North Road. It's 2,500 square metres. It has a road. It's on a corner block, so it has a road going along the side, which could be divided up into 4, 5, even 6 blocks, and still having a significant block for the main house that faces the river. When I bought that, I was still young and quite gorgeous. Now I've become an old lady, and I'm still haven't been able to go any further with this plan that I had. So as I thought, I've got over 20 years before I'm going to need to do this. This was an outcome that wouldn't be disputed. It would happen. So at the beginning of Town Planning Scheme 10, when people were invited to put submissions in, I put a submission in for a rezoning of my particular block, which on the other side of the long street is the Dalesford precinct, which the blocks have all been already subdivided up. They're small. I think they were 20 or something. So I put a proposal together, submitted a plan, and it was acknowledged as being a promising piece of land that would suit development. And that came through in the first replies to the submissions. However, I didn't get it through all the way. So it was rejected, and over the last 20 years I've made another 2, if not 3, approaches to council to ask that this block be subdivided, because it's not like every other block. It has the street frontage. It has small blocks right opposite it. And unfortunately, time has gone on, and all of my requests have come back with not supported by the town planner. So I was absolutely thrilled and delighted seeing a whole new bunch of people, and went along to the workshop that we had just recently, and I came away from that thinking, oh, there's a fresh approach here, things will change. Now, what I'm concerned about is the time frame, and it appears to me that the motion that's put for 11.1, that if that was approved by the councillors, it would give people like myself, who I think my block will be affected by that, and will give a chance for me to do a bit of planning before I'm that much older, I'm not capable of doing it anymore. So I ask on behalf of all the elders of the Bassendean community who may be waiting for some progress to support the motion by Councillor Gangel. Now, is 8 point, the motion is
11.1.
11.1.
You might be looking at the agenda from the briefing
Right.
session. It's now
Yeah.
11.1.
Thank you very much.
So just before you go, councillors may wish to ask you some questions, but I'd just like to clarify, because the motion that's actually on the table relates to the area around the Success Hill train station specifically. What you seem to be talking about is more the new scheme for the town in general, and that's what our Director Luke Gibson is working on, or will be working on for the town over the coming couple of years, and what his report will outline in February, which will give a timeline for when the new scheme will be likely to come into effect. Are there any questions for Mrs. White?
Thank you, Your Worship. So, in the past, when you've made representations to previous councils about your particular block of land, what were the reasons that were given to you as to why it wouldn't be rezoned?
Just that there was no, it was zoned R5, and that was the zoning, and they weren't interested in changing the zoning. That was the reason every time.
Okay.
So.
And just a supplemental question. So, if you had your preference, what sort of zoning is it that you think would be appropriate for your
Well,
block?
I would probably be happy with something like R25 or something like that. If I could make my blocks 450 square metres, I'd have my main house on 1,000 square metres, and then the others would be somewhere between 450 and just over 500 square metres. And to me, that's a fairly reasonable sized block, all of those.
Thank you for your answers.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Well, thank you for your time this evening and sharing your story. I'm certainly glad to be a woman that's living in this era, not in some of the past years where you've had to experience. So thank you for going ahead of us, and thanks for being here tonight. Mr. Passarelli. So Mr. Passarelli, before you sit down, you walked in a little bit late. I just reminded everybody that some of the interaction last week between members of the public and council wasn't really acceptable, so I've just asked everyone to keep that in mind.
Myself, so.
Yeah. Thank you. Please come and join the councillors.
I won't get angry. Thank you. Madam Mayor, councillors and staff. John Passarelli, 99 Old Perth Road, Bassendean. Firstly, let me start by saying I love Bassendean. I have been here for nearly 35 years, and my family and I have enjoyed all the things that Bassendean has to offer. Like many others, I love the country charm, the river, the parks, Bassendean Oval, and our establishing town centre. However, I have noticed the number of assets and infrastructure that we have lost or are losing due to insufficient funds to sustain them or maintain them over that time. For example, we used to have a beautiful, wonderful kids' playground just behind the library here, and it was closed and demolished because of unsavoury people creating problems there, and it was decided it was cheaper to get rid of it rather than work out a solution or try and find other funds to keep it going. We've had trees falling in our river because we can't afford to stop the erosion on the embankments. We can't put any monies towards that, you know. We've currently got jetties that are in, disrepair, and we can't afford, I've heard that, we're better off maybe getting rid of them. No, we don't want to do that. And we want Bassendean to have more green canopies over our streets, which is, a beautiful thing. But, what about the cost of lopping those trees and keeping them down, after a year or 2 years, to keep them below the power lines, We're a small town and we just can't afford to keep what we love without the extra revenue required to upkeep them. Delaying what is the inevitable for the increase in density from the criteria of State Planning Directions 2031 will only delay the desperately needed extra funds to sustain the needs and desires of this community. Stop wasting more of our funds on more reports and community consultations when we have already all the information and we have engaged with the people to find out what everybody wants. I shudder to think of the years and the possible 600k or more that we wasted recently on employing a strategic planner and all the other workshops, reports and consultations prior to this, when we've got so many other things that where our money could be well spent on, okay? I have seen this all drag out over the last 12 years and there are no guarantees that a new report will see the light of day. This was evident in a recent meeting with the current CEO, myself and others from the community, where we were informed that the council needed to go through a process of community consultation, and then after that was finalised, we could possibly know and were able to know the rezoning structure, and that would have come out around November this year. These are promises that just keep getting broken, and I think it's only fair that this community get some action now. If we don't get something now, I just feel that we're in jeopardy of being swallowed up by Bayswater, or the WAPC will step in and take over. Increasing densities around our train stations and our town centre is the obvious solution, and the community has agreed that this would be the better outcome. By limiting height, however, we must also understand that to achieve the allotted density requirements from the WAPC, we will also be increasing densities further into our suburbs, which will only eat away at our green matrix. This is something I'm sure our community does not want. Utilising the state planning table to define areas of various densities around the train stations and town centre is all that is required at this stage to achieve the allocated densities of the Directions 2031. All the finer detail and the broader design that Luke will get into, that can come later. In the meantime, purchasing an amalgamation of land can take place, and the elderly ratepayers that are banking on that extra retirement revenue can move on. We've got time thereafter to get that fine detail and work out guidelines of how we want our buildings to look. Just get the basic idea of what we want and the density around the town, and let developers come in and buy and amalgamate that land right now, because it'll take ages before that happens anyway. It's going to take ages. So this is now the time. The state government has allocated extra money now even to first home buyers in purchasing apartments. And I'm sure with good developers in here, this will entice a younger demographic to come to Bassendean. Younger people will generally go out, and buy stuff and, go to lunch and dinner. And this will bring more vibrancy and more employment to the town. More people equals sustainability for this town. Please consider moving this motion tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Just remain there for a moment.
Yep.
I just want to challenge a couple of things that you said, and I don't expect you to respond, but you made a comment about wasting money on community consultation, and I appreciate where you're coming from. There was the land court process, and as you'd be aware, because I know you were present in the room on many occasions, there was a lot of angst around that. And I think there was a lot of the relationship between the community and the council and the town was damaged through that process. So you are a relatively informed member of the community. There's a lot of people who are not as engaged, and they haven't had as much opportunity to understand the state planning framework, the need for us to have higher density in some areas and more people to achieve the outcomes that you're saying you want, and I think in general the people around this table also want. But in terms of the community consultation, I think that's been a really important process of helping to rebuild that trust, to help people more generally to understand what needs to take place in order to achieve those outcomes. So you may see it as being wasted, but I think looking at the experience of some of the other local governments that haven't gone through that process that has been done in a positive way, where the community's been taken on a journey, have got to the end point and had disastrous problems when the community hasn't been accepting of the schemes and zonings that have been proposed. So the reason that we have taken this approach now is so that when we get to that stage, we have a plan that the community will embrace. So I think ultimately, even though now it may seem like it's a delay, in the long term, it will allow us to move forward without having obstructions at the end of the process. You also made a comment about having a meeting with our CEO, and I know you implied, well, you didn't imply, you stated last week that there'd been promises broken and lies and so on. I also don't think that is a really fair reflection. At the time we had different staff, and we were given an undertaking that we would be at the stage where we've had a new strategy by now. We are disappointed that we're not at that stage as well, but I don't think it is fair to say that the CEO lied to you. And your comment about more people in our town achieving the outcomes, I think that is a really key message, and it's something that we need to help the broader community to understand. But where those people go is going to be a really important part of the planning documents that we produce. So I think the outcomes you're seeking are in alignment with what we are seeking as well. It's just the process that we're going through to get there, and I think we're much closer now than we have been for a long time. And having Luke Gibson on board, who is fantastic, is going to really help facilitate that. So thank you for your time here tonight, and I'll hand over to any other councillors if they have questions at this point. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Your Worship. So as someone who's been involved in this discussion over a number of years, do you think that there is a broad community sentiment in favour of 9-storey development in our town, or do you think community sentiment's a little bit lower than that?
Look, from what my experience of other workshops and what I've seen, I think a lot of the sentiment is certain areas. I know that in that workshop with Land Corp, we actually established an area where we were happy to have 9 stories. Elsewhere, I think they were looking at something a bit lower. But depending on, I think, how the design comes out, I mean, to keep that street intact out the other end of Old Perth Road, we could easily have some really high stories. If we kept everything back off the street, we could still have that appeal of that old style appeal and charm by keeping the upper stories up. So that all comes in from guidelines and design later on, you know. But if we can establish those densities now around the town, then things can at least start moving. Amalgamation can happen, developers will get involved, and things will start happening. The broad areas further out, Luke can get involved later on and work out that lower density around the town. You know, there's plenty of time for that. But right now, let's get the ball rolling. Let's get things happening. Mayor, I've just seen not only what we've gone through recently, but 12 years of it. It's not the only workshop. Land Corp wasn't the only workshop. There was many others before that we consulted the community and spent money doing that. Where did that go? What happened to their voices then? Why didn't we use that? Why are we now going again and asking the community again?
Just to reassure you, when we had Creating Communities come and assist us with the recent Bassendean Our Future engagement, all of that information that has been collated over that period of time has been fed into this, so it hasn't been lost. I appreciate what you're saying, but we are where we are now, and I think we have really good information so that the work that Luke is doing for us now is going to be well informed, and as I said before, the ultimate aim is for it to be embraced by the community.
Why do you think it'll take a long time though?
Well,
If we've
Luke's
got all the
going to
information.
bring the report to us in February to give us that timeline, so I'm sure you'll be interested to see what that report shows.
I'll wait.
Any other questions from councillors?
Thank you.
Thank you for your
That's it.
time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so councillors, moving on to item 5, which is the confirmation of minutes. So do I have a mover for 5.1A, which is that the ordinary council meetings be received? Councillor Wilson moved, seconded. Councillor Quinton, all those in favour? Carried unanimously. 5.1B, that the minutes are a true record, moved by Councillor Wilson, seconded Councillor Quinton, all those in favour? Carried unanimously. Item 6 is announcements, so just a few quick things. Some members of the committee may have provided feedback recently through the Catalyse Community Scorecard. We have had the results of that, and I think it's fair to say that we're very pleased with the response that we had from the community. We had over 800 people provide feedback, and of the 45 local governments in Western Australia that have used this as a benchmarking tool, we rated in the top 3, which is something that I think we can all be really proud of, as Bassendean being a great place to live. There were a number of areas that were identified as the town of Bassendean doing exceptionally well in. Some of them were things like youth services, help me out Peter.
Governance, leadership, library services.
Yeah. But overall, just wanted to acknowledge the great work that our staff have been doing on behalf of our community, and the community as well to contribute to that. Seeing as it is the last meeting of the year, I really want to thank our staff for all their efforts during 2019. It's been a particularly challenging year with the enormous changes that have been happening behind the scenes with staff turnover and everything that involves. So thank you everyone for what you've contributed. And on that note, this Friday will be the shutdown period for the administration over the Christmas period. So from midday on Friday, and we'll be reopening on the Thursday, the 2nd of January. No petitions, I believe. Item 8 is declarations of interest. We've had one from Councillor Barty, which is a proximity interest in relation to 10.5, which is the finalisation of Town Planning Scheme 4A. And Councillor Ganter, is yours 13.1?
Correct, Your
Yep,
Worship.
in relation to someone who's been nominated for an award for the Australia Day Citizen Awards. Anything further from councillors? No? Great, so we'll move on. There's no items deferred from the previous meeting, so on to item 10. So councillors have an enormous amount coming out of en bloc. I have 10.2, 10.3, 10.4, 10.5, 10.6, 10.7, 10.8, 10.9, 10.10, 10.11, 10.12, 10.13, 10.14, 10.17, 11, 1, 2 and 3, 13, 1 and 2. Are there any others that need to come out of en bloc? There's not many left, and I almost just read the ones that we're going to stay in. Okay, so if everyone is happy for the remaining 5 to be moved en bloc, can I have somebody move that? Councillor Barty, seconded. Councillor Hamilton, all those in favour? Carried unanimously, thank you. So we're going to move on to 10.2, which is the annual report for the year ended 30th of June this year. Councillor Hamilton, did you have something in relation to that item?
I didn't pull that out. Oh, it was not in en bloc actually.
Oh yes, sorry. Sorry, my fault. Okay, councillors, are there any questions on the annual report? No? Okay, well in that case we have a mover for the officer recommendation. Councillor Wilson, seconded. Councillor Quinton, anybody against? All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. Where's Councillor Angel gone?
Just to get a break.
Okay, so moving on to item 10.3, which is the Point Reserve Jetties update. So this would normally be Mr. Adams' report. Since he's absent, our CEO is the person that will be speaking to this. Are there any questions that councillors have on the jetty update? Councillor Clinton.
I just had a question about finance. I note in the report that it talks about funding, funding coming out of an emergency fund. Can we just clarify that? Because to date, my understanding is we've spent the $28,000 to get us to this far. Then we're approving the additional monies for the assessment tonight. I'm just wondering, when we go to the mid-year review, where has that money come from? What are we not going to be spending it on? I just have a question around finance, around where this is going to be spent.
So just clarify, it's not just the assessment, it's the design as well?
Yes, I know.
Yeah.
Sorry. You know what I meant.
Just for everyone else's benefit.
Yeah,
certainly. So as part of this year's budget, council set up a $100,000 contingency fund for emergencies such as jetties. So that will be the funding source on this particular occasion.
All right. So that doesn't leave much left then.
No.
Okay. Thanks.
Councillor Hamilton.
I note some of the grant possibilities that are mentioned, and some are obviously at a later phase than others. Given that we have 2 jetties, do you perceive that we might be doing separate grants to try and get the North Jetty on its way and doing a later grant application for the South Jetty? Do you perceive that as a possibility?
Certainly, if the North Jetty design is ready to go before the South Jetty, we'll certainly be in a better position to look for grant applications. There are a number of grant possibilities, so we'll certainly look to target as many as we can.
Okay, so following on from that, at what phase can you put in an application for a grant? I mean, you've got some rough estimates on the costing of restoring the North Jetty. At what phase can you actually put in an application for a grant, or do you have to wait for the design to be finalised?
Usually a concept design is required, so you know, the funder can see what it is they're actually funding.
Okay. So because of the time of year, it's a difficult time of year, so most of these grant applications, the earliest I can see them being put in is probably February. Would that be about right? But some of them don't look like they close until June or later, which I'm thinking we don't get an answer until later. Is that right?
Well, the first one listed on page 14 is available between January and April, and normally responses are provided shortly thereafter. So if we were to look at that as a potential funding source for the North Jetty, potentially we could look at something sort of after April if we were successful.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Look, this is the question I actually raised but never got an answer to when we were talking about the Sandy Beach jetty. I asked at that point in time for an approximation of how much we spend on jetty maintenance, and I think at the time I went back and listened to the audio. I actually referenced specifically Success Hill jetty there because it was like for like that we're looking at getting at Sandy Beach, because the reason why we weren't going to commit to it is because of the ongoing potential maintenance. But I never got an answer to how much we allocate a year for maintenance. Can I ask, I just note that there's an allocation here of $50,000 per annum. Can I ask how much we allocate currently, or how much we have allocated for maintenance to jetties?
I would have to clarify that, Councillor Dangerfield.
That was told to me previously.
Your question about ongoing allocation, I don't believe there has been up until now, is that correct?
No, I don't believe so. So one of the things the administration are doing is having a look at the asset portfolio. So we have a number of assets across the town, some of which are ageing, and having a strategy in terms of understanding future intent, as well as also investing enough to maintain assets to a certain standard is really important, which is why in this particular proposal we've included $50,000 for ongoing maintenance, not just Point Reserve, but Sandy Beach, Success Hill as well.
Just before you ask another question, just to clarify, so I had the benefit recently of hearing from Ben, who does, I forget his surname, Simmons, our asset management. So my understanding was that he's advocating for this as something that he thinks would be a much more sustainable position for council, knowing that our water-based assets can be quite costly on an annual basis.
Definitely, and the idea is that you may not need to dip into that money, you know, first year, second year, but come third year you might find that you've got some major repairs and you want to know that you can, you know, access that source of funding. So the idea is you build it up over time.
Just one thing, sorry, Councillor Hamilton. So in here it refers to the renewal and future maintenance, and I sent a question through today about the maintenance, and am I correct in thinking the answer was that this fund wouldn't be used so much for the small maintenance that would come out of operational budgets, but this would be more for when there was a significant problem that didn't require replacement, but it was allowing the facility to be maintained as an open facility for the community and so on?
That's right.
Councillor Hamilton?
My questions were similar to that, in that, you know, you had renewal and future maintenance. I would assume that if there is major works to be done on a jetty, that you would have to come to council anyway to be released from the reserve fund. So anything else like the inspections of jetties and small maintenance would be operational budget year in, year out. So
there's probably a couple of things there. Certainly the minor works would come out of an operational budget, but major works, the idea is that you build up, if we're setting aside $50,000 per annum for the maintenance of the jetties, that $50,000 would build up year after year. You may not spend it every year, but the idea is that you've got that nest egg. So if we have a situation like Point Reserve, we've actually got funding set aside.
I do understand that, yeah.
Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Worship. So just in relation to that item, point 4 on item 10.3, the $50,000, you're proposing that that be a special reserve dedicated solely for that purpose, or is it part of a larger reserve?
Part of a budget, an annual budget for specifically marine assets.
Special reserve.
Thank you, Worship. Tangentially then, talking about marine assets, did we ever get a reply back from the state government about the jetty at Sandy Beach Reserve?
I'll have to follow that up with Councillor Wilson.
Councillor Hamilton?
Just letting people know that I have actually got an amendment to the officer's recommendation.
So is this you moving the motion with the amendment?
If people are finished with their questions, otherwise I'll wait.
Everyone finished with questions? Okay, great. Please proceed.
So basically, that Council 1 notes the update from officers on both jetties, including dependencies and critical success factors. 2 allocates funding for the condition and structural assessment of South Jetty. 3 allocates funding for the condition and structural assessment of North Jetty piles, including jetty upgrade and design. And 4 endorses provision in the long-term financial plan and annual budget for reserves to fund the renewal of marine assets, that is jetty, pontoons, boat ramps and associated riverbank restoration projects to the value of $40,000 per annum. And 5, request staff to submit applications for grant funding to facilitate the reinstatement of North Jetty as soon as practicable, after upgrade design is finalised. And 6, request staff provide an update to council once the condition and structural assessment of South Jetty is completed.
So just to be clear, the major changes there are you remove the word maintenance for the purposes of the reserve fund.
Yep.
And you added in riverbank restoration projects and changed the value to 40 rather than 50,000, and then the other 2 points related to applying for grants and reporting back to council.
Yep.
Is there any comment from the staff on that proposal?
Just in relation to the funding, the $40,000 per annum, the $50,000, I know it's not significant, but I guess the $50,000 was based on the current assets that we currently have.
Okay,
and
that's fine. We'll take it back up to 50.
Yeah.
Right. See, I'm not that difficult.
Is that my phone? Sorry, Councillor Gandil?
Yeah, I just got a question.
So just before you ask that question, was that everything that you...
It was largely the...
and the riverbank restoration?
Associated. May I explain something there?
Yes.
Riverbank restoration, associated riverbank restoration. I put that in because often when you're doing jetty restoration or renewal, there's often work to be done with the riverbank just around that jetty.
Yes.
So I figured that we may as well include that as well.
And I would support that, and often with grant opportunities it's combined as well. So.
Yeah.
Councillor Gandil, you have a question?
Yes, I do. Just looking at the two, so the officer recommendation basically allocates funding for the condition and structural assessment, allocates funding for the condition and structural assessment of the North Jetty. So the two jetties we allocate funding to, which is attached. I'm just wondering at this stage, just because I do note that we're submitting for grant applications, but was that not the intention of the staff in any case?
Councillor Hamilton just likes to have it explicitly stated.
So I'm just wondering then, just in relation to timeframes, because I know obviously the department's quite interested in this. I thought we'll potentially needed to get certainly the South Jetty restored expeditiously.
North Jetty?
The North Jetty, sorry, the North Jetty. Need to get that restored expeditiously. But if we're putting in for grant funding, that actually then I think I heard April potentially.
Yeah, so we have had further conversations with the Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions and Department of Transport. They're happy to receive a copy of the minutes from the November and December OCM. So they actually have the evidence that things are progressing with the jetties. They're aware that Council is keen to reinstate both jetties, but they're also aware that there's a process that we need to go through in terms of the structural assessment, design, and obviously looking at funding opportunities. They would like to see the North one reinstated sooner, and that is the one that we have greater certainty about at this stage.
So then I just want to understand the process. So would we be receiving another report once we have the allocated costs of
yes.
that, and what avenues then would then go down, including potentially applying for grants, or if we just fund it out of reserves? Is that what's going to happen?
I would prefer a report back to Council,
Yep.
so to update Council
Yes.
on the proposed timeframes and potential costs.
Okay, if there are no further questions, Councillor Hamilton has moved with the amendment, but changing it to 50,000 rather than the 40,000 she originally read out. Is there a seconder? Councillor Wilson. Is there anybody against? Councillor Gandil, would you like to debate Councillor Hamilton or not?
I'll just keep it
Can
simple.
I remind councillors there's not an obligation to debate every single
No,
time.
just really simple. I have no problems with creating a reserve fund. I think that's quite, well, given our situation at the moment, it actually means that we're safeguarding for the future. And I put in point 5 about the grant application simply to let the staff know that if they can find an ability to apply for a grant sooner rather than later, then go for it. In respect, it also allows the DBCA to actually see that we're genuine in moving this forward. That's it.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson? You are wonderful, everybody. Councillor Gandil?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Look, I'm actually going to support the motion, but I am actually speaking against, and I'll use this opportunity to speak once rather than at each subsequent item. I did raise this issue at the briefing session, and it does relate to 10.3, 10.4, 10.7 as well. I believe that the community has absolute right to financial security, financial scrutiny of how the funds are being allocated within the town budget. What we have subsequently happened is there's no longer an amount. So for the ratepayers to actually know where the funds are being allocated. They've then got to try and figure out when the invoice is submitted to be paid to realise what we've actually allocated here, which I think is very difficult. That it doesn't really show a transparency in relation to financial scrutiny. That's why I'm speaking against this. I did speak against it when council ultimately moved to go that way, but I do believe that the ratepayers have absolutely every right for financial scrutiny of how much we're allocating to individual projects, or potentially looking to allocate in budget reviews and the like. So I'm just going to state that now, so then I don't speak subsequently at the other items. Thank you.
Thank you. So just for the benefit of people who may not know what Councillor Gangel is referring to, Council has made a decision that when we have items that we're putting out for tenders and I guess large quotes as well, that instead of us advertising specifically in our agendas the exact amount that we're allocating, we are choosing to keep that confidential until such time as a contract has been awarded. It is not in any way to reduce the scrutiny or to not be transparent. It is simply to try and avoid situations where people who are, hold on, Councillor Gangel, who are wanting to apply to quote or to tender don't have the amount flagged in advance, and avoid the situation where we've allocated $150,000 and we get a quote for $150,000 and so forth. So I appreciate what you're saying, Councillor Gangel, but it has been a decision of council,
Yes.
and you have spoken to it a number of times. I think we all appreciate your point.
I just want to raise a point of clarification, Your Worship.
Yes.
So you said until we get a tender awarded, but 10.8, 10.9 and 10.10 have all contractors awarded, but no financial considerations to them publicly.
So in those situations, there's nothing to stop that being made public, correct? Once we've awarded the tender?
Certainly once it's awarded, that's correct.
I was just going to clarify, it's once it's awarded.
Once it's awarded,
Yep.
Okay, so we've had the mover and the seconder and against. Is there anyone else who wants to speak to this? Councillor Hamilton, you okay, so we'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? It's carried unanimously. So 10.4, which is the proposal to install shade at the skate park. Are there any questions?
Yes.
Hold on a sec, Councillor Hamilton first.
Sorry. Okay. I note the report. I also mentioned last week at the briefing that in the original motion put forward by the mover, Councillor Quinton, that there was in the background information a reference to considering shade sails or trees. I think it was and or trees. So I don't believe some consideration was really given to trees as an option reading the report. I note that there has been a small amendment put through, or not an amendment, an addition put into the report on page 21, which basically indicates they'll estimate to take 10 to 15 years to get adequate shade, blah, blah, blah. So my question is, why was there not consideration of implementing perhaps one or two shades and also planting trees, so that in the end you actually get a decent tree growth happening within a certain period of time, whilst your shades are actually deteriorating as an asset?
I think this is a question for you.
Simply, there wasn't a consideration. We provided the additional information that was asked for at the briefing session, which was about adding in shade trees and how long they would take.
Appreciate your honesty.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions?
May I ask the officers if they've actually been to Belmont Skate Park?
What is it at Belmont Skate Park?
Belmont Skate Park is a fabulous skate park surrounded by trees on all sides with not a single shade sail in sight and shady all day long.
It sounds wonderful. Any other, Councillor Quinton?
Yes, I just wanted, I mean, it's not clear when we might get a final design, including trees and landscaping. Is there going to be a final design come back to us before there's a Lotteries West grant? I'm just, the officer recommendation is a bit vague on exactly what it is, because there are options put forward. And as Councillor Hamilton has noted, and we discussed at the briefing session, and the officer has included in the updated report, which is excellent, it would be nice to see a final design of what has been agreed to and where we might put trees and everything. So I'm just wondering, is something else going to come back before there's a lottery? Because obviously you have to send a final design to Lotteries West for grant funding. Is that the process?
So maybe our CEO can speak to that.
So the way in which the report has been written and the recommendations provided, there's obviously been some research undertaken by ADA. And I guess what we're looking for from council is, if this is a priority in the scheme of all of the other priorities that we're currently progressing, that funding would be allocated in 2021 for that design work to occur and the installation. And as part of that process, we could also look at grant funding, but the design work would need to occur first.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, so we have an officer recommendation. Is there a mover? Councillor Quinton. Is there a seconder? Councillor Wilson. Anybody against? Councillor Hamilton. Councillor Quinton, would you like to speak to?
Yes, thank you. I know I'm going to preempt what Councillor Hamilton is going to talk about, and that is prioritising need within our community. And we, as the officer has already stated, and as we have heard a lot from the young people within our community, there is a high use of the skate park to the entranceway of Bassendean. It is, as Councillor Ganja will tell you, part of the entranceway to Bassendean. And I think, given that it is a highly used skate park, we are going into what is probably, well, this week is one of the hottest weeks on record in Perth. And summers are only going to get hotter. We need to start preempting and providing shade for our young people who are using our skate parks. I think this is a priority. It is something we can preempt, particularly if we start planting trees around the skate park now, or at least in for the winter planting season next year. We can at least get some mature trees growing within 5 years. So this is a priority. I encourage councillors to start the process on this. And as the CEO has pointed out, there is going to be a broader plan for our parks and open spaces, which will come back to council, but this is a priority for now.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was very pleased to second the original motion that's led to this report, and I'm happy to second this motion now for the reasons Councillor Quinton sets out, which is this is one of the most highly utilised areas of recreational space in our town. Every single time I go past there are lots of young kids playing, and it's important that we have sun-smart play environments so that kids can play safely and have shade whilst doing so. Nothing in this motion prevents trees from being planted. In fact, we have previously made very generous budget allocations to plant an unprecedented number of trees in our town, and I would hope that we would also be able to plant trees in addition to putting in shade sails. It is not one or the other, and I would encourage councillors to support the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton.
Okay. I have no aversion to providing shade for our young people. I have no aversion to shade sails. I have no aversion to trees. In fact, I quite like trees. I think that trees would provide a better fit with our long-term goals to increase tree canopy in the town. My concerns relate to the fact that we have numerous deteriorated assets in the town, that we are, as put into our auditor's report, that we are underperforming in respect to asset renewal, the funds put aside for asset renewal. We have multiple small projects that are on the list that have been pushed back to the mid-year review, which will undoubtedly not be successfully reviewed at the mid-year review, or we push back to next year. At what point, I ask you, do we stop leapfrogging other projects ahead of the ones that have already been identified? At what point do we accommodate people in areas other than central Bassendean? When are we going to look after our ratepayers who pay their rates every year throughout the town and look after the assets throughout the town? Eden Hill, the far reaches of Eden Hill, that has hardly a tree in sight in some areas, that has playgrounds that have been deteriorated for years on end. When are we going to give them some shade? I'm asking for a proper assessment of our assets and how we're going to actually do this, and to stop pushing back all our other projects to leapfrog others in front of it. There's got to be a point where we actually listen to the plans that we put down in the past and we action them. We're not doing that, and as a consequence, we are a small council, we have limited staffing, we have limited resources, and we simply cannot accommodate every single thing that we would like to do. So we have to choose, and our choices have to be sensible.
Thank you. Other speakers? Councillor Gadget?
Thank you, Your Worship. I wasn't going to speak, but Councillor Hamilton captured my ear. I do support this. I think it would be tremendous to have covering at the skate park. I think it'll actually perhaps make the area look tidier as well, to have covering there, and colour and what have you potentially as part of the covering. But what I did note particularly was some not such kind remarks for the north part of our town. I would just like to remind councillors that in fact at Mary Crescent we've got a fantastic, wonderful nature-based playground that's been created amongst the trees. In fact, that was actually stopped from being what's commonly referred to as a plastic fantastic, so we could actually have nature play at Mary Crescent. I believe we've just been allocated funding for the swampland, also at Mary Crescent in Eden Hill. I believe that at Jubilee we've allocated, we do have a new play area there. We have allocated funding to do an overall study, so we can look at making sure we hopefully get to a one-shop stop, I think it's called, for all the sporting facilities that are there. We've looked at lighting as well. So and then in Ashfield, of course, we have the relatively new playground there. We also have toilet facilities. We've also included covering and shade for people there. We've done wonderful riverbank restoration work in Ashfield. So I think to say that purely and simply we focus solely on the town centre, I think is inaccurate, and I think across the town there has been many benefits achieved over a period of time, and certainly looking forward to that continuing, and I look forward to seeing shade sales at our skate park.
Thank you. Any other speakers? I would like to just speak for the motion briefly. Nobody else raised their hand today. I agree with shade over our facilities for our children and our teens, for everybody in fact, but I also agree with Councillor Hamilton's position around the state of our assets and the number of priorities that we have, and that sometimes things that we've identified previously slip off the bottom of the list and other things come up in front. But my particular issue with this proposal at this point in time is in relation to the State Heritage Council and the fact that we haven't actually sought permission yet to potentially block, as the report says, the vista of the building. I think before we start investing time in applying for grants and doing designs and so on, that we need to first of all get that clarified. So my preference would be to take this away, get all of that information, and then council can make a decision on whether or not this is something that's actually worthwhile pursuing, or whether it's going to end up as a dead end because we don't actually get the approval for the project that we are requesting at this point in time. Councillor Quinton, would you like to speak again?
Yes, I will just respond to your comments then, Your Worship, because the report does state that needs to be done. So I don't think that the staff are going to go away and start designing this without having made that application, which will take 3 months. So I think the staff have recognised that there is that need to apply for the heritage amendment or agreement or permission. So I think we need to move this past this motion tonight so that process can start. Because once we get into the planting season, it might be too late to start planting those trees. So we are running out of time. We're away until February now. So I do encourage councillors, and I just want to add to that list of all the wonderful things that are happening in the north of our town is the underground power that is happening. So there will be more money spent on trees around Eden Hills. So once again, this is a priority. This is something that we can decide tonight so we can get a process moving.
So just to clarify a couple of things that councillors have said, there's a few projects that have been mentioned that aren't actually confirmed or endorsed by council yet. They're things that have been flagged as potentially happening, some of which we need to have MOUs and so on in place first. So please just hold your horses a little bit. And there was something else Councillor Quinton said. Oh, you spoke about planting trees. I don't see anything in this motion that refers to planting trees. So just to clarify there. Okay, so let's put this to the vote. All councillors in favour, Councillor Wilson, Quinton, Barty, Gangel and McWilliam. Against is Councillor Hamilton and McLennan, and that is carried. 10.5, which is finalisation of town planning scheme 4A. Councillor Barty, you've got a proximity interest, so you need to leave the room. Somebody please remind me to call him back when we finish with this item. And councillors, just to bring your attention and members of the committee that there are a couple of points added to this item that are in bold that weren't at the briefing session. Thank you, Aidan. Are there any questions from councillors?
Yes. Last week we heard a deputation from a community member from the Friends of Bindaring about lots 17 and 19 Anstey Road. And I just had a question around, we have just recently done a reassessment of our flood zones, and I just had a query about whether that area had been included within that flood zone, and if those lots 17 and 19 are prone to flooding.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, those two lots are affected by the flood zone.
Okay, so I have a question now then. If anyone wants to build on 17 and 19 now, would they have to apply for something attached to their title similar to the houses that get built down around Sandy Beach? Sorry, I forget what that's called.
Development in the floodplain policy, that one?
You attach it to the title.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I believe you're referring to a notification on title.
Yes, thank you.
Under either Section 70A of the Transfer of Land Act, or there's another notification under the Planning Development Act. Short answer be that is most likely. Those are mechanisms used to alert future purchasers to encumbrances or things that may constrain or restrict development or the use of the site, so that would be quite likely. That said, the land is zoned residential under the local planning scheme. It has frontage to a constructed road and is next door to existing residential properties. The report before council tonight is simply seeking to finalise the scheme from a financial perspective. It's not seeking to make any structural changes to the scheme. It would be open to council to do that, but that would be a different and longer process.
Could those amendments and changes be done with our new town planning scheme, or would they have to be an additional amendment? Sorry, I'm just trying to get the process in my head. Do you understand where I'm at?
Through you, Madam Mayor, that could be rolled into the broader process. A new or amended scheme can have as many or as few changes as council resolves to initiate. The report before us sets out a broad series of steps as to how to finalise the cost share arrangement, being TPS 4A. It would be open to council, though, as part of a separate process, being a review of the local planning framework, to change the structural elements of the scheme.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Hamilton? I think Councillor Gantel.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Just in relation to the that mention of putting something on the title, I'm not sure if the officer is aware of this, but I do believe we were endeavouring to do that to a resident who was building a new structure, a new house in North Road, the very top part of North Road. I believe that very caveat or title proposal was challenged, and they were successful in getting that challenged. The challenge was successful in not having that placed on the title. Are you aware of that? Just mentioning 17 and 19, that somebody's actually challenged that position and been successful in the town.
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes I am. That was imposed by staff as part of the development approval. It was referred to the State Administrative Tribunal for review, and the town, as part of the reconsideration of that condition, agreed to remove it on that occasion. That doesn't change council's underlying policy, but on that occasion, that condition was negotiated out. Quite correct.
I just have a question about the point that was raised earlier in the meeting about other potential owners surrounding the lot that is proposed for inclusion in the land swap being interested in purchasing the property. I'm not sure, I certainly wasn't aware of that previously. I'm not sure whether the staff have had that contact. I would imagine we would have some obligation to engage with them as well, or not?
Through you, Madam Mayor, in terms of the first part, I was not aware either, and nor the staff that assisted me with this report, some of whom have been here quite some time. In terms of our obligations under the Land Administration Act, in terms of undertaking a land transaction, there are steps that we need to go through in terms of consultation. If at that stage, if council was to proceed as recommended, and we would ultimately get to that phase of consultation on a land swap or sale, as the case may be, it would be open, at the very least at that stage, for other landowners to register their interest. If council would prefer, it would be possible to undertake that consultation more proactively and seek expression of interest at this stage, and let that guide subsequent decisions of council.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton?
I had a resident contact me. She backs on to 17 and 19 Anstey Road, and her query was that she had no idea that those two blocks were zoned residential, that when she bought that property 20 years ago or whatever, that it was, she was given to understand that it was parks. So I guess my question is, have residents adjoining those two blocks, has there been any communication with them about the potential sale of these two blocks?
Through you, Madam Mayor, not at this stage. The land, like I say, is zoned residential under the scheme. The town owns it as if it were any other landowner. Obviously, if the town wishes to undertake the sale of those property, statutory obligations kick in under the Land Administration Act, but until this point there has been no consultation to that effect.
Okay. So I have circulated some amendments to the officer's recommendation, which I...
So are you proposing to move the officer's recommendation with those
With my
amendments?
amendments, yes.
That's the right question.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, sorry. Apologies.
That's all right. So blocks 17 and 19 Anstey Road, do you have any knowledge about when they were zoned residential? Or
They've always been residential.
They've always been residential?
Maybe we can let the staff answer the question.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't have the exact information in front of me, but I do believe that 17, 19, 21 and 23 at some point in the past were all partly zoned residential and partly reserved local open space, and an amendment, I believe in the early 2000s, effectively reserved all of 21 and 23 as local open space and zoned all of 17 and 19 as residential. So I believe there was an amendment in the early 2000s which changed the status quo.
Thank you.
Thank you. Then in relation to the question raised by Mr. Johnson about other potential buyers for lot 27 Highland Street, does all of the officer recommendation in relation to 27 Highland Street fit within 0.7 of 10.5, or are there other?
And 6?
And 6.
Is it?
Yeah, 6 and 7.
What? No, because there's the owners of 29 Highland Street. No, you're correct. So just 7?
So just 7. Yeah. And just to confirm, you're not aware of any discussions with any other potential acquirers of that block? Okay.
So can I just clarify though, because just in relation to the question from Councillor Wilson, point 6 currently says that the owners of 29 Highland Street be advised of the need to subdivide their land to facilitate acquisition by the town. So that would only apply if it was the owner of 29 Highland Street who ended up acquiring our lot. Yeah?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. 29 Highland Street is the property next door immediately to the east of 27 Highland Street.
Yep.
It runs south of Highland Street with the northern extent reserved as local open space and the southern extent zoned residential. To enable the acquisition of the northern portion by the town, they would need to excise that along with the property.
Right, great, thank you. Okay, if there's no further questions, Councillor Hamilton, you were attempting to move an amendment?
Yeah. So, the council proceeds with finalisation of town planning scheme number 4A on the following basis. 1, staff will advocate to the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage that it purchases the 10 properties previously acquired by the town which are reserved for Parks and Recreation under the Metropolitan Regional Scheme. 2, staff will obtain estimates of the cost associated with remediation and subdivision into 2 lots of 14 Lot 103 Iverson Place, as well as land valuations for those Iverson Place lots. 3, staff will obtain estimates of the costs associated with the creation of the proposed Hamilton Street lot, as well as a land valuation for that site. 4, that the following be considered for inclusion in 2020-21 budget: the cost of remediation of 14 Iverson Place, the sale of the 2 lots created from 14 Iverson Place, followed by following remediation, the purchase of part of 97 Kenny Street and part of 13 Hatton Court, the cost of creating the proposed Hamilton Street lot and the sale of the proposed Hamilton Street lot. That the 5, that the following be considered for inclusion in the corporate business plan for 2021, so 21-22 financial year. That is the purchase of parts of 18 Anstey Road and 17 Harcourt Street after obtaining sworn land valuations. 6, that the owners of 29 Highland Street, 18 Anstey Road and 17 Harcourt Street be advised of the need to subdivide their land to facilitate acquisition by the town. 7, that a land swap be pursued whereby the owners of 29 Highland Street and lot 211 Carnegie Road provide those lots to the town in return for 27L Highland Street. 8, that a report be provided to council reviewing all financial considerations after points 1 through to 7 are substantially completed, where council will further consider the future of 17 and 19 Anstey Road.
Thank you. Can I just ask Mr. Gibson to comment on any of the changes that have been made there?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The key change there is clearly moving 17 and 19 Anstey Road from point 2 into a new point 8. I'd suggest the motivation behind that change is to allow all other matters to be progressed, if not finalised, so that the future of those two lots can be considered with the benefit of having that information, particularly in relation to the financial position of the scheme and whether there would be a need for council to dispose of those properties to settle any outstanding financial obligations. Ultimately, it is a minor change. It's a slight reordering of the tasks and not one that poses a huge concern to staff.
Thank you. Okay. Is that a question or a seconding?
A question. Yes. Councillor Hamilton, are you open to considering a possible amendment of point 7 to allow staff to investigate the opportunity of other people acquiring the land?
I was thinking of that myself.
Okay, so you're moving it with the amendment that's about to be refined, and you're seconding it with this amendment. Is that correct, Councillor Wilson?
No, but I'm proposing an amendment.
Okay, well we need to have
see
someone
if it's
second it
I'll
before.
second it.
Thank you. So Councillor Quinton has seconded.
May I ask staff a question? Well,
Of course.
okay. Obviously, in point 7, it's very much what you propose to pursue the correspondence that came to us offering this land swap. In that process, would you see any difficulty in corresponding with those other residents from Watson Street that might adjoin that land to see what their feedback might be or not?
Through you, Madam Mayor, if that's what council wants staff to do, that is certainly able to be done. The recommendation as written is simply to act on the approach from the landowner and deal with them effectively exclusively until such time as we have to consult under the Land Administration Act. If council wants staff, if council would like staff to be more proactive up front and seek expressions from other nearby landowners, it might be useful if that's embedded into the resolution.
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned before that, like for instance, it may be that the time lapse between that correspondence, it may be that that owner might not be interested anymore. I don't know, but I'm assuming that if the land swap was going to proceed, there would be the normal process where there's councillor disposing of a land parcel, they would advertise, and would they at that point in time correspond with neighbouring adjoining properties? So there will be an opportunity for those property owners to have comment or perhaps even to put in a counter offer?
Through you, Madam Mayor, all correct. The only point I would add is, having spoken to the affected owner last week at the briefing session, they are still very keen.
Okay, good.
Okay, how are you going, Councillor Wilson?
I'm not quite sure, Your Worship, but I'll give it a crack. I propose a rewrite of point 7 to say that the potential of a land swap or purchase be investigated with all neighbouring and adjoining property holders and be subject to a report back to council.
Are you nodding? How are you going, Amy?
I've got some of it down, but I can get it.
Okay, are you clear, councillors, what's being proposed there? Okay, so Councillor Hamilton has moved, Councillor Quinton has seconded. Is there anybody against? Councillor Gadgell, would you like to speak, Councillor Hamilton?
I see this as being a process that has steps in it. I'm very keen to actually at least get some of the steps on the way. So the correspondence from a landowner offering a land swap is obviously of interest to us. How that pans out with other adjoining landowners, I don't know, because obviously if there's interest from several parties, then administration will go down that road as they're confronted with it. The other parcels of land are fairly straightforward. I tend to agree with the various assessments put forward by our staff about the disposal of some of those lots. The Iverson Road lot is obviously one that could be remediated and sold. There are the Hamilton Street sliver of land is another one that requires some work but eventually can be sold. So these are all financial aspects that may bring revenue back to let us finalise the scheme in a fashion that doesn't leave us out of pocket too much. There are some unknowns which have been perhaps an impediment to us in the past to finalising these schemes, which is why some of the sworn land valuations are important. So it's a step-by-step process. I think that the staff have a very good handle on how to move forward, and I just want to see all the financial figures first before we decide on those final 2 lots. Thank you.
Councillor Quinton?
Yes, I agree with everything Councillor Hamilton has said, and I'm glad that she's pulled 17 and 19 out. And as Mr. Gibson has said, let's just see how far down the track we can go before we throw everything out and sell everything, because it might be possible that we save 17 and 19 and down the track turn it back into parks and recreation. We might not need to sell it. So of course this is something that we do need to retain our green space, particularly around such a wonderful asset that is Bindaring. So I agree, there is a process here. Let's just go step by step. This is the first time that we've been able to, Mr. Kay, we're getting somewhere. And I think that the community would finally be grateful for Mr. Kay constantly bringing this to council. And I've only been here 2 years, and his work should be commended in getting us this far. So let's just, I know that you want to get it all done at once, I hear you, but it might be that we don't have to sell everything in order to pay for the scheme. We might be able, and if that's the case, if 17 and 19 have to be sold, let's do that, but let's take the steps first.
Thank you. Councillor Gadger?
Thank you, Your Worship. Look, certainly in my time on council, this has been obviously an outstanding item. I certainly remember when I first got elected to council, Mayor Klein at the stage there often referred to these blocks as the sewered blocks. That have no house on them. The land was allocated for the purpose of this scheme. I think we need to remember that. We are looking at in the report a deficit of up to 2 million. Look, I have no issue with the report coming back. Quite sensible, but I believe it's one of these things that we constantly get caught up with in this town, with reports coming back without having the full cost estimates given back to council. And I believe if we exclude the potential value of those 2 blocks, it comes back. We're down by $1 million for the scheme, then we've got to go out again and get those lots then potentially valued, how much they're worth. I personally would be much more comfortable getting everything evaluated, bringing everything back to council, rather than isolating 2 potential very significant blocks for the finalisation of funding for the scheme out of the process. So that's where I sit currently. I just believe we should be looking at it holistically and as overall under an umbrella, rather than separating 2 blocks and then potentially having a report come back and then needing to go through another process to try and finalise the scheme. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else would like to speak? Okay, Councillor Hamilton, anything further?
Thank you, Councillor Gandrel. The only comment I would make in response to some of the statements you've made is that it costs money to get valuations, and it's dubious how much money can be made out of those Anstey Street blocks given that they need remediation. So rather than go and waste money on valuations that may not necessarily be needed, I would rather leave those right to the end, sort out everything else, and then see what the financial position is. And certainly at that point in time, we would be in a better position to analyse whether those Anstey Street blocks should be sold off. Thank you.
Okay, thank you everyone. So we'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? It's Councillor Quinton, Wilson, Hamilton, McWilliam and McLennan, and against is Councillor Gandel, so that is carried. Would someone mind getting Councillor Barty, please? So when Councillor Lady comes back, we'll be moving on to item 10.6, which is the proposal to dispose of lot number 246, lot 5 on Morley Drive East in Eden Hill. Welcome back, Chris. So we've just moved on to item 10.6, the proposal to dispose of the Morley Drive East lot. I have a question in relation to the public notice that's proposed, if this is supported by council. We've previously had a concept plan submitted for the site that was the topic of the deputation given last week. I'm just wondering whether the advertising that's being planned will be associated with that concept plan or whether that would not feature.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I suppose staff haven't turned our mind too much to that, given that we're still waiting on a council decision as to whether to proceed or not. It would certainly be possible that we could provide that information as context and make sure it's quite clear to the community that this is simply there as a concept on the part of the developer showing one potential proposal for the site. It's not, if we were to provide it, we would need to make it clear that we haven't got any actual implied support of staff or council or JDAP, and it's simply there for diagrammatic purposes. Alternatively, we could simply advertise a fairly bland proposal to dispose of land. But I think in terms of the benefit of the end user, I would be in favour of the former and make it quite clear that that information is diagrammatic only.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think we need to be very careful of, if council does support this, creating an expectation that doesn't necessarily match what the development potential of that site is. And I'm aware that those concept plans have been seen by the community already. And now that we've had some additional feedback, that we need to be mindful of what we're presenting and making sure it's not creating that expectation that cannot necessarily be delivered on. Councillor Hamilton?
Obviously I sent an email through this afternoon because I was just a little concerned with point 1 in the officer's recommendation, in that we're supposed to, according to the Act, consider feedback from the community after it's been advertised and then make a decision. So again, along the veins of what the Mayor has said, I'm concerned about creating an expectation that, this is almost a done deal. I'm very, very concerned about creating any sort of expectation like that, particularly given the 2 objections that have come in and the deputations last week, along the lines of the commercial space is about 2.5 times, is that right? 2.5 times the level of what is normal category for that area?
Through you, Madam Mayor, the concept proposal does broadly provide commercial floor space well in excess of what the local planning framework originally contemplated. I don't have the exact figures of the square meterage, but I suppose the point of the report in front of us is simply about the land sale. The issue of any future development outcomes are separate. And going back to the Mayor's point earlier, is that we need to be clear with the community and ourselves, I think, to make sure we're only dealing with the potential land transaction at this stage.
Just a moment. Did you have something you wanted to say? No? Councillor Hamilton?
I suppose it is a bit of a tangled web though now, because those concept plans have been out in the public. Basically there's an expectation, so the commentary you might get back from the advertisement is along the lines of, we want something, anything, blah blah blah. So I'm a bit concerned that we have boxed ourselves in, for lack of a better word, and I don't see a way out of that.
I think you're making a statement rather than asking a question of
Yeah,
the staff
I know.
at the moment.
Sorry, apologies.
So just reflecting on the email that Councillor Hamilton sent this afternoon, if there aren't any other questions at the moment, I would like to propose an alternative wording. I've run it past the CEO, but I'm not sure whether you've seen it. The alternative wording was that Council gives public notice of the proposed disposal of 246 Lot 5 Morley Drive, East Eden Hill, in accordance with Section 3.58 of the Local Government Act and the terms offered by the owner of the abutting site. So that removes the concern about providing in principle agreement at this stage without having already advertised with the community.
Can you just read that out again?
I can. The council gives public notice of the proposed disposition of, is that correct, or disposal? Disposal of 246 Lot 5 Morley Drive East, Eden Hill, in accordance with Section 3.58 of the Local Government Act and the terms offered by the owner of the abutting site.
Is that a different section of the Act?
It is. It is the correct section though, Mr.
Because
Gibson.
3.59 is the original officer recommendation, and you've put 3.58.
So we're just talking about advertising here.
I understand, but you've said, just making sure that you said 3.58.
And what do you want? It's correct?
Yeah,
It's correct. Okay.
Because the officer recommendation says 3.59, so they're not
Yeah,
different
I
sections.
did note that as well, and I did
Okay.
check.
Okay, thanks.
Are you satisfied that that's correct, Mr. Gibson? Sure. Well, maybe while we get that clarified, we can continue on.
So just on a point of clarification, is this alternative wording for point 1?
It's for the entire motion. So instead of us providing in-principle agreement, which the concern was raised under the Local Government Act, whether we're giving in-principle agreement to something we haven't yet advertised. So we would still go out to the community, advertise the proposal to sell a piece of land, but we're not saying we're agreeing to that until we get the feedback from the community. Okay, so I'm happy to move that alternative. Councillor Wilson's happy to second that. Is there anybody against? All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, everyone. Amy, are you comfortable with that? Seconded. Yep. Okay, 10.7, the Safe Active Street along Brookfield. Any questions for the staff?
Yes.
Yes, Councillor.
Okay, so, and I realise that I don't think the right staff member is here for this. Oh, okay, lucky you. Okay, I have already foreshadowed that the new proposed footpath that goes from Old Perth Road down past Palmerston Park, but given that there's a funding shortfall, that I don't see the necessity of that. So is that a problem to actually have that removed from the plans at this stage to try and create less funding shortfall?
Can I just clarify the comment about there being a funding shortfall? That's not what my understanding of the situation is that correct?
That's right. So the project has been rescoped to reduce construction costs and retain the amenity. So we believe if we were to go out to tender for the project, we would come in within budget. If there was a budget overrun, perhaps this might be one of the opportunities.
So if I recall correctly, when this was raised last week at the briefing session, we were informed that if it did go above what the specified funding was at the moment, the Department of Transport had additional money that they could use to cover that additional cost. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. They have a contingency fund.
Okay, so let me put another slant on this. Okay, given that there is a perfectly good footpath on the other side of the road, and given that it's a park, it's quite a lovely park, and the proposed new footpath is on the side that only has a block of units on the corner of Old Perth Road and Whitfield and then 2 houses, is a path necessary? That would be my next question on that particular path.
So I have actually discussed this with the engineer that was involved in the design and consultation today, and certainly he doesn't have any major concerns. What he did say is that it was proposed, the path as it is drawn in the diagram, to provide direct connection between Old Perth Road and Palmerston Reserve without having to cross or walk on the road for those in the community, for whatever reason, would not be confident in doing so.
Can I also, just to follow on from that, because I understand Councillor Hamilton's concerns about having additional hard surfaces if they're not necessary. We've also spoken about doing some upgrades at Palmerston Square, and if I remember correctly, one of the things that has been raised by the community, even though we haven't formally consulted on this, was potentially having some pathways through the park rather than it just being grass.
So we will be doing a consultation on Palmerston and Padbury starting in February. So
Okay, I do have another question. The petition from the residents down the end of Whitfield between Reed Street and the cul-de-sac, they raised a point about the lack of lighting on the little path that goes from that end across to West Road. And I don't believe lighting is included in the plans whatsoever. So has the administration given any thought to how that affects, I mean, if there's increased traffic on there, are we going to be obligated to put lighting in there? Is there any thoughts on that at all at the moment?
I would have to consult with the engineer.
Yeah.
But it's, I think it's a good question, and one that I think we probably need to look at in terms of potential bike foot traffic in that area and whether it presents a danger.
I just have one more question. We had received an email earlier this week about this project and some concerns about the Organic Kids Childcare Centre.
Yes.
And I think you responded that one of our staff members was happy to meet on the site. Is there scope, you know, if we approve this tonight, for there to be any sort of minor changes to accommodate anything that might come out of that conversation?
Definitely, and I think that was about the car bays and reversing and so on, and potential safety risks. But our engineer's confident that we can accommodate those.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any further questions? Okay, so we need somebody to move a motion. An officer recommendation?
I will move the officer recommendation.
Okay. Is there a seconder for the officer recommendation?
Would you accept an amendment?
Well, then I'll ask another question. Given the information about us going to consultation for Palmerston Park, and if then the community says, yes, we would like a footpath on that side of the road, then that cost will now be borne on the town and not us, correct? And not the Department of Transport, correct?
That's correct.
Right. So this is my hesitation in removing that section of the footpath until we've gone to consultation on that. When is construction expected to start on this, by the way?
I believe the Department of Transport are keen to proceed as soon as possible.
Would it be before or after the consultation's completed on the Palmerston Park?
I believe construction will start early in the new year, so it'll probably be around the same time.
Okay. Then I move the officer recommendation.
Can I ask another question?
One more question.
So you've indicated at some stage, or rather that there was some feedback that residents might want a pathway through the park. Where did that come from?
No, I said that and the CEO didn't say that. I just remember it being something that was flagged as a possibility that people may want in that space, not that we've had official feedback on that.
So who flagged it?
It was just in discussions around what could be in that site. There was all sorts of things thrown.
Okay, so it's not really anything that's a result of any sort of resident community. Right, so which brings me back to the fact
that... Is it a question, Councillor? Okay, so Councillor Quinton has moved the officer recommendation. We don't have a seconder at this point. Councillor Barty, I'm assuming Councillor Hamilton is against.
Yep.
Councillor Quinton, would you like to speak?
This is a wonderful project. We are finally at a point where we can say, yes, let's go ahead. The cost overrun is something that I am led to believe will be fully costed by the Department of Transport. We've been down a long, long road trying to get this project up, and we're finally at the 11th hour. And I think the final process now is to say yes, let's go ahead. This is something our community has been asking for. We have gone down detailed design. Our community has been brought along on the process with us, down a very good journey that says we have listened to everything about coming in and out of their houses, where their bins are going to go. It is going to provide safe, active street for our children who are learning to ride their bikes, for older people who want to walk safely along that road, all the way down to Sandy Beach. And finally we get a project, and I think that we need to finally say yes and get it going. The only reason I do not support Councillor Hamilton's amendment is because we are about to go and ask the community what they want Palmerston Park to look like. And I know in discussions that we have had previously with our community is that people with disability have wanted to talk about having a path go through Palmerston Park so that they can appreciate the park, because there is no footpath in the park. There are also no barbecues in the park, and I know that there are a lot of mothers groups that use that park all of the time, and I myself have used that park with my pram, which continually gets bogged in order to use the park. So there is a big need. There is a community consultation that's going to happen. So let's just leave the design process as it is. If at a later stage, after that consultation has happened, we can take that footpath out, then let's do it at that stage. But at this stage, let's get the funding from the Department of Transport. Let's say yes to the design and let's get this project going.
Can I just make a point before anybody else speaks? I've just been having a look at some dates and talking with our CEO. So it was mentioned earlier that this would start early next year. So just having a look at the fact that we need to go to tender first, and our CEO is saying that probably won't happen till February, given Christmas and so on. Yeah. So that will need to come back, and then even once the tender's awarded, we've already specified that construction can't happen at a time other than the school holidays, which will be at the earliest the 10th of April. We would have time to do the consultation in February as planned in Palmerston Square and have that feedback prior to construction starting. So we can probably address both the concerns around the footpath within the time frame that we have. So, yeah. Okay, so Councillor Quinton has spoken. Councillor Barty, would you like to speak?
No, Councillor Quinton has articulated my point of view already.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton?
I generally support the Safe Active Streets concept. I have had some concerns about this particular project. I've had concerns about the councillor workshop, which only covered the section coming from Guildford down to Old Perth Road, with assurances that we would be advised and consulted further with the other sections, which did not happen. And in fact, the last community consultation only happened because the mayor pushed and asked why it had not happened. So there's been some concerns for me. The petition from the residents down the end of Whitfield Street, I found that concerning. They certainly did identify some things which I hadn't thought of. So in that respect, I don't think all of those things are insurmountable, but it certainly means there'll be extra expenditures on the town's part eventually. Whether it happens sooner rather than later, I don't know. Probably later, the way we're going, but move on. The pathway on Palmerston Street, I have actually no problem with the idea of a winding path through the park. I think that's a lovely idea. I do have problems with creating straight paths parallel to a path on the other side of the road that serves no purpose. Serves absolutely no purpose whatsoever. If you, on the other hand, had a path winding through the park, I'd think great. But to have one directly opposite that pre-existing path that's good, I think that's ridiculous. I think it's a waste of money. So basically I oppose this. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Is there a speaker for the motion? Against? Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Your Worship. I've voted against this particular project at every step of the way. Not because I'm opposed to Safe Active Streets, but because I think this is the right project in the wrong location. As I have said previously, this is an example of chaotic decision making and planning and funding behaviour by the state government. They came to us and said, here is money for a project that is not even in the top 20 of your projects in the bicycle plan. We have a bicycle plan. This is not one of the top 20 projects. We were given this offer on a take it or leave it basis. I'd like to acknowledge the hard work of staff. The current version that we have before us now is, in my personal opinion, significantly less problematic than the original plan that we looked at, and will lead to a less worse outcome than was previously proposed. However, I do believe it's the right project in the wrong place. There are several other priorities that we've already identified in our cycling plan that are not being dealt with, and I'll continue my opposition to it.
Any other speakers? Councillor Gadgil?
Thank you, Your Worship. Look, I have concerns. I know the CEO has suggested that there won't be financial shortfalls. There's been nothing guaranteed at this stage that will be the case. I spoke about earlier about public scrutiny on funding. This is not small change stuff. We're talking about the shortfall in the potential allocated of funding for this project. That's why I'm hesitant to support it until we have 100% assurances and guarantees that the shortfall, any shortfall, will be covered. And it's, as I say, it's not small cheese, the shortfall we're talking about. The other thing is as well, I was actually quite excited in relation to potential paths and stuff being constructed. I have noted that the Broadway path has since been constructed, and unfortunately it's not as riveting as what I was hoping it would be, and hasn't had the positive feedback that I was certainly hoping for. But at this stage, I am hesitant to support it with that shortfall, not knowing if that's going to be fully picked up and covered. Thank you.
Thank you. Are we able to get some clarification in writing from DOT to put Councillor Gangels and other councillors' minds at rest? Seek to have that confirmed from them?
Certainly, and the other option would be to go to market and actually get responses to see what sort of cost we're up for, and whether the funding provided by Department of Transport will cover the costs of the project. That will give us an accurate measure.
Thank you. Councillor Gadgil?
Yes, I've actually got a question just in relation. I'm just very, very fascinated about the numbers we reveal and don't reveal. In the agenda, we reveal that there was an allocated existing funding agreement of 1.2. We reveal that openly, but yet we won't reveal what the shortfall is.
There isn't a shortfall yet.
Well,
Yeah, it's in the
I believe that confidential attachment 3, I can't obviously read it out because we're in a public meeting, but it certainly has indicated the project will cost X. The town has requested an additional funding of Y, so that the project is 100% funded by the Department of Transport. Now, Your Worship, I'm happy for you to explain to me why that is not a shortfall.
I said there isn't a shortfall yet because.
I see. We haven't gone out to tender.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Thank you for clarifying that. Well, there's a future possibility of a shortfall.
I think there's always a future
yes,
possibility.
Yes, indeed.
Of a
But I'm just curious why we publish publicly 1.2, but we won't potentially publish. I'm going to make this up. It's going to be a wild number.
Hold on. We've got your point. Maybe I think Mr. White has an answer for that. Is that you who was indicating that?
The budget.
Yep.
So that's something we've actually put in a line item to in the budget.
So the 1.2 from the Department of Transport. Yes.
Because
Yes.
the state already published it.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
They don't care about project.
Okay, I was intending to speak to some of your points, but I've completely lost my train of thought now after all of that. Just very quickly, I think Councillor Wilson's point about whether or not this project should go ahead, we've passed that point long ago. Council made the decision to pursue this project, and whether or not he thinks it's a good project or not, we're well down the track, and that is not what we're deciding tonight. Councillor Hamilton, you're very consistent in your advocacy for less hard surfaces, and I completely agree with you in the vast majority of occasions. I do think in this location there may be some warrant for the path, but I take comfort in the fact that there is time available for us to remove it from the project if, when we consult with the community in February about Palmerston Square, it becomes apparent that that's not required. So I think leaving it in at this point in time is fine, and we'll have the option to remove it at a later date if we find that it's necessary to include. There was something else I wanted to say, but it is now gone thanks to Councillor Gangel's comments, so I'll leave it there. Councillor Quinton, did you want to speak again?
No, you've clarified, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. So we'll put that to the vote. All those in favour, Councillor Quinton, Barty, McWilliam and McLennan. Against is Councillor Wilson, Hamilton and Gangel, so that is carried. Moving on to 10.8, it's the request for tender for our tree pruning services. I had a question at the briefing session. I'm not sure, was it to you that I asked it about the contract management, and it was about the lollipopping and the curb to the footpath pruning. Did we manage to get a response on that yet, or is it something we can ask later on?
Thank you, Worship. My understanding on that is that the contractor has pruned in the past to the specifications that meet Australian standards, as instructed by the town, by the town's parks and gardens. So there may be some scope to provide some different instructions to the contractor in the future.
Okay. Can we maybe have a conversation about that before they, if it gets awarded, they start their work? And also something else that council has flagged in the briefing was about some of the principles behind our contracts, and maybe if we could have a conversation about that at some stage with council, I think that would be really appreciated.
Certainly.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Can I just confirm, I believe I was told this last week, but sorry, I got a bit confused. Did you say it was a fee for service? So if we have a decrease in the number of trees requiring pruning in the third year, that the expenditure will obviously decrease. Is that right?
That's absolutely correct. So there's an amount allocated in the operational budget based on history and anticipated future requirements. That the services are performed, invoices are issued to the town, and the town pays on normal terms.
Now, the other comment or question I have is that obviously there are certain aspects to tree pruning where you shouldn't prune more than a certain percentage, you shouldn't prune right in the middle of summer, a few things like that. Now, this company, as far as I can tell, have been doing our work for some time now. Yeah. So how do you create parameters around that where we get good outcomes? Because at the moment we've had some directions where perhaps the directions given have been less than ideal and the outcome's been disastrous. So how do you plan to sort that out?
I think what we would need to do is really get a better idea of the outcomes that we're seeking, and then we can work with the manager of Parks and Gardens to closely monitor the contract to achieve those outcomes.
Councillor Wilson, is that a question?
Yes, thank you, Worship. How is this better value than doing the work in-house? How are we achieving savings or better outcomes for our trees by contracting this work out in comparison to having the capacity to do the work internally?
Okay, so at present we don't have the capacity to do the work internally, so there would be a requirement to develop that capacity to obtain the necessary machinery, equipment and personnel to undertake that work. We haven't engaged in research to investigate that as a proposition prior to going out to market for this particular tender.
So if that was something council wanted to consider in future, that would be a discussion to be had for
There's certainly scope for perhaps a business case to be developed to look at the option of bringing services such as this in-house with a view to comparing whether or not it can be done more efficiently or more cost effectively in-house.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Gager, could you let me know when you're leaving the room? I keep looking up and you're just disappeared.
Oh,
okay. Just give me a little wave. Okay, so we have an officer recommendation before us. Is there a mover for the recommendation? Councillor Quinton, a seconder? Councillor McWilliam, anybody against?
10.8, is it?
It's 10.8, yes.
Yes, thank you.
All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. 10.9, we've got another tender for road profiling and supply of asphalt. Are there any questions on this item? Okay, do we have a mover?
Sorry, one question.
Yes.
in one of the publications that we get supplied in our councillor bags, there was a story talking about other councils using recycled plastic and other recovered materials in their road base. So I'm just wondering if there is scope within the contract for us to be able to pursue that potentially as an option at some point during the life of the contract.
Thank you. I'd have to take advice from the engineer in relation to that. I do know that this particular contractor that we're recommending does currently recycle its road base after it's been removed from its plant. But I'm not sure of the technical specifications in relation to the makeup and the plastic and so on that goes into the asphalt. So I'll take that advice from the engineer.
I may be wrong, but I believe we asked this question before, and I think Councillor Quinton might have asked it, and I think the answer was that we don't have a lot of road-based requirements because we don't have new roads, and it was more the asphalt over the top.
I do recall that coming up too.
Yes, sorry, but the particular article said that it was the asphalt in the top included.
Oh, you said road base.
Thank you for the correction, Your Worship.
All right, so do we have a mover for the officer recommendation? Councillor Quinton, a seconder. Councillor McWilliam, anybody against? All those in favour? It's carried unanimously. A third tender for item 1010, which is cleaning services for the town's facilities. Question?
Yep. I did ask last week, and I just wanted to clarify. I asked whether there were going to be conditions put into the contract for the successful tender that when they do relief work for us with the other employees who are doing some of our outlets, that we are charged a rate that is not exorbitant. Is that being pursued by your department?
I apologise, Councillor, I haven't followed that up since the briefing session.
Okay.
So I'll have to have a look and come back to you on that. I apologise.
I think your response last week was that it wouldn't be that difficult to incorporate that in the contract.
No, I don't think so, because it's a more flexible contract, because it does provide, for example, for the potential rolling of some of the other sites that currently aren't covered by our cleaning contract and are done by other means. So it does provide for that facility in the future if that's the way, if that's desired.
Okay.
Is that a question? Or moving?
Thank you, Your Worship. Given that the capital overheads for providing cleaning services are significantly lower than tree lopping, has any thought or consideration been given to bringing this work back in-house to Town of Bassendean employed cleaners instead of going out to contract?
Thank you, Councillor. I think my answer there, I think, would be the same as for tree pruning. Not at this point, but there's no reason why we certainly couldn't look at that and survey the landscape, put up a business case and see where that lies as far as efficiency and value for money is concerned.
Potentially in 5 years' time?
If the contract's awarded, that's right.
Are we obligated to, so in here in the recommendation we've got 3 years and an option to extend for a further 2, which my understanding is that's essentially a 5-year contract?
No, I don't think that's necessarily the case.
Okay.
The town has the option to extend or to not extend.
So at the 3-year point, if we had done a business case,
Yes.
we could then say, actually, we'd like to take this in-house now?
I believe so, yes.
Any other questions? Okay, do we have a mover of the recommendation? Councillor Quinton, seconded Councillor Barty. Anybody against? Councillor Wilson, does anyone want to debate?
Yes.
Okay, so Councillor Quinton, you don't wish to speak? No. Councillor Barty? Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Your Worship. I appreciate that small local governments often have a need to bring in expertise or have a need to bring in contractors with specialised equipment and machinery from time to time because it does not make any economic sense for the town to own and operate that capacity. I do not, however, accept that that extends to the provision of cleaning services. There have been a number of occasions over the last year and a half where I've received complaints from residents about the state of cleaning that has been done by contractors, which has then required town staff to then go and remedy, and the contractor to then be chased up to provide remedial work. We can and should employ staff under our employee collective agreement wherever possible. I do not believe the case has been made out for us to outsource cleaning, and as such I'll be voting against it.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? Okay, so we'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Councillor Quinton, Barty, Gangel, McWilliam and McLennan, and against is Councillor Wilson and Hamilton. So that is carried. 10.11, this is the proposed men's shed lease. Questions for our staff?
Your Worship, just letting you know when the time comes, happy to exhaust all questions, but I'm happy to move the officer recommendation.
Thank you.
Happy to second it.
Okay, questions?
Okay, I've got multiple questions. Sorry. Not the agenda.
Does anyone else have a question on Councillor Hamilton? No?
On page 51 of the agenda, up top we've got dot points. And those dot points go that basically in broad terms the lease was based on the following assumptions, which was annual rent of $1, initial lease term of 5 years with 3 additional lease terms of 5 years each, the leasee to be liable for operating expenses, the leasee to be permitted to sublease, blah blah blah. I'm curious about where these broad terms came from, because they certainly weren't exactly things that were discussed by councillors in workshops. So I'm just curious about where those particular broad terms came from.
My recommendation is we had a workshop in relation to that.
So apparently, well, I believe there was one in November when I was away, is that correct? Yeah.
There was a council workshop on the 5th of November. There was a discussion paper circulated prior to that workshop, which sort of outlined those broad headline type areas, seeking some high-level guidance from councillors in order to instruct the lawyer to just prepare an initial lease, so that something could be on the table that we could work with.
So the fact that
just to clarify, our CEO is saying that when it was provided, there wasn't actually much, if any, feedback given from councillors when it was provided in the bulletin. Is that correct?
So it was subsequent. The draft lease was subsequently provided in a CEO bulletin following the councillor workshop. That's right.
Thanks. I guess what I'm getting at is it sounds very similar to a lease that was prepared for a previous site, and so I would assume that some of these broad terms came from that.
I conducted a desktop review of other men's shed lease agreements.
No, I meant the one that was prepared for the other site, the depot site, previously in previous years. Maybe.
Well, I have read that previous lease,
yep,
and I included a copy of that along with the draft business plan for the Men's Shed Association group in the papers that accompanied the discussion paper for the council workshop. This lease wasn't informed by that lease. It was informed by a desktop review that I conducted of other men's shed leases. We obtained a copy of a lease prepared by McLeod's for the men's shed in the Shire of Mundaring. We liaised with other councils. We then came to the council workshop, sought some high-level guidance from council on some of those issues that are mentioned in those dot points. Then instructed McLeod's to prepare an initial draft lease based on those dot points, which was then provided to council in a CEO bulletin.
Okay. So on the same page, we've got communication and engagement. I'm interested in what consultation, it's got the consultation with obviously the men's shed proponents, but what other community consultation was done outside of that group?
Well, my instruction was to there's a council resolution to say that I needed to bring a lease agreement for the men's shed back to council prior to completion of construction. The lease agreement is between the town and the Bassendean community men's shed. So I consulted with that group as the potential lessee.
Okay, understood. In that respect, then yes, the consultation was just with the men's shed. I must admit, though, I was probably alluding to prior to that there appeared to be no consultation with the general public on this matter. I was just curious, item 7 in the attachments for these has the permitted purpose as club premises. Just clarify that for me, because I thought that club premises under a community purpose was for premises that were licensed or could sell alcohol, but I might be wrong there, and I was just curious about that allocation.
Sorry, whereabouts is that, councillor?
Okay, it was item 7 has the permitted purpose as club. I think that might be
club premises, being
club
premises used by a legally constituted club or association or other body of persons united by a common interest for the lessee's activities.
Okay, so that's fine.
Just wanted on that, that wouldn't exclude an individual from hiring the front section if they so wished?
No, absolutely not.
Okay. Can I also ask, in our industrial area policy, we have provision where there's supposed to be mature trees for every 4 car parking bays, but on the site visit today, clearly that's not there. So can I ask how that's going to be accommodated?
So maybe our CEO can speak to that.
Certainly, there is a plan to landscape the area, and we're working with Watercourt, who have offered to revegetate the front verge and side verge, but there's also ability to landscape other parts of the block as well to rebuild the tree canopy.
Okay, but in our industrial area policy, we're supposed to be providing 1 mature tree per 4 car parking bays. So the car, and that is to actually provide canopy over bitumised surfaces or concrete surfaces. We don't have that in that car park. It's all been completely surfaced.
Councillor Hampton, I understand your concern and I share your concern, but I'm not sure that it's going to affect the decision making around the lease this evening.
Nothing's affected this decision throughout the whole 18 months, really.
Okay, so I've lost track of who moved. Was it you, Councillor Gangel, and seconded by Councillor Wilson? Clearly, Councillor Hamilton is against. So, Councillor Gangel, would you wish to speak?
Thank you, Your Worship. Look, we're now so exciting at the final hurdle of this process. Certainly, a process that's been long going on during my time on council, during my time as mayor, and now during my time as a councillor. It's very exciting to actually see the construction today, going there and actually seeing the completed project. It looks fantastic, huge space inside to be utilised, massive potential out the back of the shed for a very well landscaped and tree-lined area with nice shade trees and barbecues and the like. No doubt that the men's shed will put in place there. This has also been through a rigorous process as well to get to the lease agreement. My understanding is, as attached, the administration is happy of the town. The men's shed are also satisfied with the conditions mentioned in the lease. Therefore, I'm very excited to be able to support this, to move this, and hopefully tonight to finalise it and have the men in their shed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gangel. Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just briefly going to the particulars of the lease itself, I think this lease represents a significant advance on some of the leases that the town has previously entered into. In particular, the provisions around the potential future occupant, the men's shed, having responsibility for some of the upkeep and maintenance of the facility. In my time on council, we have had many requests from some of our leaseholders in our other leases, some of whom have bar licences and their own independent streams of income, coming to us, asking us to pay for repairs and renovations that they ought properly make provision for themselves from the revenues that they derive from their bar licences. The fact that we have been able to set, I think, a new standard now with this lease is a good thing for ratepayers and residents, and I would hope that it would serve as a template for future lease negotiations going forward. I support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Hamilton?
Okay. In the business world, I've been dealing with leases for 32 years, and I think this is anything but a good lease from a ratepayer's point of view, but everyone has their different perspective. I will challenge, though, the statement made by Councillor Wilson that the men's shed will be paying for the maintenance, in that in the schedule, in the attachment, item 10, number 2, expenditure caps. That is capped at $2,500 per annum. That's the maximum before the leaseor, which is us, the landlord, have to pay anything else. So it's totally capped at $2,500. So I really think that that is a little bit misrepresenting the actual status of what this document says. I concede, I had proposed some amendments which obviously won't get up if this particular motion is supported, but I had put forward what I consider to be some rather minor changes, in that I still adhere to the principle of a peppercorn rent, which is $1 a year. Now, bearing in mind that this is an asset that the town will need to renew within 20 years, bearing in mind that, yet again, as per the auditor's report, we are not putting enough money aside for asset renewal. So obviously in 20 years' time this asset will be worth more than $600,000, because it's cost us almost, or maybe more than $400,000, don't know. We haven't had a decent business plan to actually anticipate all those costs. My first motion that was supported by this council, or previous council, was, one of the dot points was provision of a business plan. The provision of the business plan was lacking in information. So we've barreled ahead in this project without having all the relevant information. And I think the preparation of a business plan is essential before you start on a project, but we haven't had that. So we're going in there higgledy-piggledy, and now we're dealing with a lease after the project has started, which is, again, crazy. But here we are, we find ourselves here. So I made my peace with it and thought I'll just make some minor amendments and let the men's shed settle into their shed at $1 a year, which ratepayers are paying for. But I will not stand here and listen to people say that they are going to be paying for all the maintenance, because that's simply not true.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton. Is there a speaker for the motion? Any other speakers against the motion? I'd like to speak briefly. I'm in full support of us coming up with a lease agreement that meets the men's needs, and I'm also pleased that we're at this stage in the process where we have a shed that's almost at completion that the men will very soon be able to move into. The current lease proposes a peppercorn rent, and I'm comfortable with that on the understanding that the men are going to deliver considerable community benefit to the town of Bassendean, not only through their work for themselves in the shed, but also the undertakings that they've given to contribute to community projects, and I commend them on their willingness to do so. I did have concerns. I think all of our facilities, wherever possible, should be utilised as fully as they're able to be, with as much multi-purpose as possible. The last thing we want is more assets laying idle, being underutilised. So I'm pleased with the inclusion that has been added since the briefing session about that incentivises, well, I guess makes it a requirement that anyone else that wishes to use it can't be unreasonably refused. Not that I doubted the men's intention to do that anyway. My main concern is with the current lease term. So from speaking to Paul White, any term up to 21 years is open to us. We currently have a 20-year lease term with 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus 5 years. Having a look at the lease terms of other men's shed, Bayswater's is for 5 years, Mundaring's is for 5 and 5, Vincent's is for 2 and 10. Us straight away going into what is essentially a 20-year lease, I think is probably a bit premature. I would be supportive of us having a shorter lease term so we can figure out how the men's shed are coping and also how it's working for the town of Bassendean. I think it's clear that the business case needs a little bit more work. We don't have a final copy, we have a draft at this point. So with that in mind, I think having a shorter lease term would be wise, and I would encourage councillors to support an alternative motion that reconsidered the lease term. In terms of the maintenance, I'm conscious of us not wanting to overload the men's shed with unnecessary cost burdens, but I do take Councillor Hamilton's point that that might be something else that we would wish to look at in more detail. But I'd be very happy to approve a lease tonight, but I'd particularly like us to review the lease term. Speaking to Mr White, having a change to the actual lease term would not be a significant enough amendment to require us going back to the Minister, so it wouldn't delay the men going into their shed at this stage. Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Gangel, did you wish to speak again?
Thank you, Your Worship. I get a little bit confused about things sometimes. It's a shed built for the specific purpose of the men's shed organisation, corporation, however you wish to refer to it, and yet we're saying we potentially want to somehow limit the lease term agreement. I think the benefit of having a men's shed, I won't go through them all, but is limitless. You'll see also the benefit is we'll attract a lot of other interested people from outside the district into the town to utilise the space. It's a space that will be used for a whole range of community benefits as well. Also the fact that I believe, if I'm correct, there's about, I think, 25% women membership as well as part of the organisation, so I think we'll have that cross-use as well with the shed. So I'm very confident that this shed will be very, very well utilised. It will be of massive benefit to the community, and the community will also appreciate everything that's achieved from us at long last finalising and opening our Bassendean men's shed. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so let's put that to the vote. All those in favour is Councillor Wilson, Quinton, Barty, Gangel, McWilliam, and against is Councillor Hamilton and McLennan, so that is carried. Item 10.12 is the Ordinance of Governance Committee meeting. Any questions?
Many, but confidential.
Okay, maybe we can ask them at another time. Okay, if there's no questions, does someone want to move the officer recommendation? Councillor McWilliam, seconded. Councillor Wilson. Anyone against? All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 10.13, nomination for JDAP members. So we have councillors McLennan and Hamilton as the members, with McWilliam and Wilson as the deputies, as per our previous discussion. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry, excuse me.
Merry Christmas.
Yes, the audit and governance item.
Yes.
Okay. Movement William and seconded councillor Wilson. Yes, thank you.
So Councillor Hamilton, we're on 10:13, which is the JDAP nominations. So do we have a mover? Councillor Gangel, seconded. Councillor Quinton. Anyone against? All those in favour? Carried. Councillor Hamilton? Yes? Carried unanimously. 10:14, this is the Local Emergency Management Committee. I brought this out of one block because Councillor Hamilton had kindly offered to take the place of myself on the committee. Are you still happy to do that, Councillor Hamilton?
Yep.
Okay, so I'd be happy to move the officer recommendation with the second point that Councillor Hamilton replaces Councillor McLennan as a member of the LEMAC. Is there a seconder? Councillor Quinton. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Moving on to 10:17, this is the accounts. Councillor Gadger.
Oh, I do have one. Thank you very much, Your Worship. Okay, just let me just find the page. Oh, yes, here we are. So it's on page 6 of 12.
On the attachments.
Yes, thank you. It's for land care weed control. Various sites application of weed control. $7,579.55. Is that for the steaming?
I would have to follow that up.
Yeah. And also, if you're following up, then two more questions on that. Just wanted to know if that's on top of the $218,000 you supplied me previously that we've paid out. And also, if you could, the cost, very exciting, I'm very happy. We're about to get Guildford Road cleaned up, I believe, as well. So those ones as well. Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Hamilton, I think you had some.
Oh, yeah. Okay. EFT 39522. I'm just trying to find what page it's on.
3?
Yep. We have electors members induction $1,980. May I ask what that was? Was that the lawyer who came and did the hour-and-a-half speech? No.
No, that was the half-day team building session we had with new council.
Oh, okay, that's fine. Okay, I just wasn't sure. We also have EFT 39506, which confused me a little bit because it's got Ashfield Sports Club cleaning as per agreed, 5,500. So I would have thought that cleaning would have been in their lease. You know, these fabulous leases that we keep giving away. I thought that would have been in there.
The town actually pays Ashfield Sports Club to clean the premises. However, I will say that payment wasn't actually made to the sports club. It was deducted from their outstanding debt to the town.
Right, okay. Thank you. EFT 39491, we've got festoon lights, Whitfield Street End, $21,038. I have no problems with the festoon lights. What I wanted to know is the contractor or the company that are installing these, is there some obligation on them to actually, because these things keep not working. So I'm ringing or emailing the guys at the depot all the time, and I'm wondering what the obligation might be
Our
on the
CEO is
installer.
taking some notes. I think she's going to follow it up.
Yep. Okay. EFT 39489, Community Consultation Verge Policy Review, $4,800. And we have no verge policy, new verge policy. Can I ask when, that might come to us?
I would expect that would be delivered early in the new year, so probably the
Excellent.
February OCN.
Okay. Now we seem to have quite a few EFTs for Coles. EFT 39553, $2,800. EFT 39480, $1,088. What's with us patronising Coles so much lately? Is they got a special on?
Always down.
It might be some of the community barbecues or things like that.
Maybe it's the meat packs.
It may be attributed to our briefing sessions or...
Okay, fine. Men's Shed, EFT 39452. Now I note a couple of months ago that the barbecues were, when they were providing their services for barbecues, for some of these community events, it was quite cheap. But this time we're up around the $950 mark, and there was another one there for about $1,800, which I can't remember where it was. But what I'm getting at is this price difference apparently is because they are now purchasing the food for the barbecues. It's a very big price jump.
My understanding is that I think the 1800 one might have been the 1% in last month's list of payments. But,
Right.
my understanding is that it's for running the barbecue and purchasing the items that are sold at the barbecue.
Councillor Hamilton, could I get you to ask maybe one last one, and then anything further we can follow up with the staff later?
EFT 39450, classic concert, $4,143. This was for the over 55s, and I would have loved to have gone to a classic concert, but I didn't even know there was a classic concert. So perhaps maybe if we're going to put on a classic concert, we can have the community as a whole go. Is that an idea maybe?
Oh, we'd have to find out. I don't know.
Okay.
I think it might have been part of Seniors Week.
Yeah, I think it was a Seniors Week event.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's about advertising it more broadly is the point you're making, I think.
Oh, I don't know. I
Yeah.
just thought I missed out on a classic concert.
Well, it's a personalised invitation for Councillor Hamilton next year.
No, I want the whole community
I
to
know.
go to a classic concert.
Okay, so if there's no further questions, do we have a mover for the officer recommendation? Councillor Wilson, second, and Councillor Quinton. All those in favour? Carried. Councillor Hamilton, I'm assuming you're putting your hand up.
I was thinking about not, but I
Carried
will.
unanimously, thank you. Okay, so now moving on to the notices. Yes.
Can we possibly return to item 1014, because regarding the local emergency committee,
Oh,
but it
sorry.
wasn't just about Councillor Hamilton replacing you on the committee, it's also approval of dates.
Yeah, we've already voted on that item then.
It's not the officer's recommendation, it's been voted on.
We just voted on 1017, the accounts paid, just
I'm
then.
talking about 1014, 1014, go back to 1014.
Yes, I'm just not sure what you're saying, mate.
We voted on whether council was happy to approve Councillor Hamilton to replace you on that committee.
Yes.
And in actual fact, the officer recommendation is simply to endorse the following 2020
So I
dates.
moved the officer recommendation with a
Okay.
second point, and the second point was that Councillor Hamilton take my place.
Okay.
So we've approved, we voted on
Yeah.
the dates.
All right. Thank you.
Was there a problem with the dates, or you just thought we
No,
missed it?
no, I just
Okay, yes, no problems.
glazed over.
Okay, just so everyone's clear, we're now on item 11.1, which is the note. Oh, sorry.
Yes, just before we move on to item 11, I have two notes that I would like to have incorporated into the minutes, just explaining my reasons for voting against resolution 10.7 and 10.10.
I think you have missed that opportunity.
I saved it until the end.
You need to do it immediately after the item. So in future, I'll let you do it this time, but in future you need to make it known immediately after the item.
Okay. Thank you.
11.1, so Councillor Gangel's notice of motion in relation to the local planning scheme 10. So we've heard a number of people speak on this evening. Are there any questions that councillors have? Okay, so councillor, question?
Yes, a question to staff or to Councillor Gangel, is that okay?
Yes, you can ask a question of Councillor Gangel.
Councillor Gangel, the table that's included in the motion includes RAC1, which, as I understand it, allows for building up to a height of 11 stories. Is it your intention to allow for buildings of a height, of 9 stories?
Mm-hmm.
Is it your intention to allow for buildings to a height of 9 stories in your motion?
So, as I read the R codes, and Luke can correct me if I'm wrong, we can insert through the maximum height definitions, through the scheme and relevant local planning and local structure plans as well. Is that? I'll just seek clarification on that. My understanding, reading the R codes, we could do that.
So the answer to Councillor Wilson's question is
yes, I'm asking a question.
That's not your intention, but maybe you can explain how it would work.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Broadly, yes, there are mechanisms that can be used to expand or bring back certain controls. In terms of what's being proposed in the current notice of motion, it's simply referring broadly to the zoning definition REC 1 through 4 without any associated restriction.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yes. In relation to point 2 of your motion, where it says the town of Bassendean acknowledges the possible 15,000 square metres of assembled land, I've not seen that in any reports from staff to date, and you have not provided any evidence of that in your motion. Is there somewhere you might direct me to such that I could be satisfied that there is an amalgamation of land of that size?
So that's come from my discussions with residents in the area that I've been it's anecdotal that I've been led to believe that there are 26 landholders that are interested in having a scheme amendment for an assembly of land for future development in that area. So I initially thought it was for simply potentially up to 3 landholders, but I've been subsequently advised that the parcels of land actually equate to about 26 landholders.
Councillor Hamilton?
Following on from that comment that there's 26 landholders, would it not be advisable for those landholders to actually make a representation to council in the new year so that we can actually understand what their aspirations are? Because I don't know all these landholders. You may know them, but I don't. And so as a council that represents our community, I would actually like to have some sort of representation from that group, even perhaps a workshop with them to understand their aspirations. Would you?
Yeah, I don't have an issue with that.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Do you, Councillor Gansel, do you have any understanding of where these owners are? Are they all adjacent to each other?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Or whereabouts, sorry, are they adjacent to each other?
And this is my understanding that it is the area bounded Thompson Road to Lord Street, so it's in that area, in that section there, directly adjacent to Success Hills Station. So if you...
That's West Road there.
Yeah, so we're at 17, here we are. So it's this section.
Okay.
Yes.
So if everyone's questions are satisfied, Councillor Gansel, you're moving your motion. Is there a seconder for the motion? Okay, so that lapses. 11.2 is the notice of motion for Councillor Wilson regarding FOGO. Thank you, Bryce, for staying the duration of the meeting. Are there questions on the motion for Bryce? Councillor Quinton?
Thank you. I just, I remember a conversation when you gave a workshop a little while ago about this process of allowing residents and giving them an option to opt out and then that would trigger a communication engagement process.
Excuse me, people.
An engagement process, and I remember you saying it might be a phone call, you might knock on their door, and that it would be actually 3 or 4 engagements before they actually said no, I definitely want to opt out. So I wonder if you might be able to explain that engagement again for us.
Thanks for the question. Yeah, I believe that was by the previous manager of assets, Ken Carden. That was based on the City of Melbourne, City of Fremantle and Town of Peace, Fremantle rollout method, where they rolled out a 140 litre bin to everybody and then started the engagement process where people notified that they had issues with the size of the bin. So where they had issues with the bin, they would do a first instant visit to have a look and see what's in the bin and offer some advice to those people who were struggling with the system. They would return sometime later, usually 2 weeks, which is a full collection cycle. Again, look in the bins, see how things are going, take an assessment of what's in the bin and how much is in there, and then again offer some advice to that resident, and then come back a third time. And if they came back the third time and there was still some issues with what's in the bin or the level of material was too much to handle in that system, then they would allow that person to have a larger service.
Okay, so just to clarify, because my sense from the motion is that they would be able to opt out before they got their bin, but you're saying that they would get their bin and then the engagement No, let me just clarify with Bryce. Then that so let me just be clear on what you've just said. That they would get their bin. Let me just clarify. That they would get their bin and then that would trigger the engagement, or would there be an engagement before they get their bin?
So if I understand the question correctly, I think the previous one that I just talked about, that was by the previous manager of asset services. So they would still get that bin at the end after those 3 times. The more recent discussions that we had at the councillor workshop was that we would allow those people to opt out up front, and then we would start the engagement from there.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, and that's my question. So, before they get their bin, what is the engagement with them? So that's with their existing bin, and then they talk about upgrading. So I just want to be clear.
Yeah, so if we can set however many engagement points that we would like to have with that. We could have it as no engagement points, have that person simply opt out, and that's the decision. Or we could have a number of points in there where we discuss that person's needs.
Okay, so just before you ask that question, Deanie, I know I've had conversations with you about the need for us to have the communication plan mapped out really clearly so that everybody has a common understanding of what the engagement plan is. Do you know when that's going to be available for councillors to look at and comment on?
Okay, so through the chair, we met with the EMRC today. We met with Marcus Geisler and Bryce, and we met with a number of their communication and education officers, and they have already provided us to the CEO a copy of their community engagement and communications plan. We've asked them to speed it up a little, and we mapped out today when we'll be receiving information. Our next Thrive is due to go out the first week of February. They're going to provide us 6 pages of copy to go within that Thrive, and the remainder of the Thrive will be about Wonder Realm. They're going to provide us with 3 videos that we can use during that first week of February, and we're going to do a quite intensive campaign through social media and through mailbox in regard to the 3-bin system in that first week of February. So that's our next touch point.
So my understanding is at the moment, without this motion, is that there's a plan for you to have a workshop or report come to council in February.
Report to council.
Report to council, and your plan at the moment is to start this process in February. I didn't hear you say that you would send us the whole sort of plan of the engagement process. That would be really appreciated. If
So that's already gone to councillors through the bulletin?
Yes. but we were talking about the key messages because I think that's
We were waiting on.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the EMRC has given us an undertaking to give them to us by January 15th.
My question is in relation to Councillor Quinton's question. Bryce, were you answering what Melville did when they rolled it out, or what the town of Bassendean will propose to do in February, or what it is that my motion is proposing to do? Because it was very unclear to me as to what it was that was being discussed.
So yes, you're correct, there was 3 different options that were briefly discussed there. So there was the Melville, we'll call it just the Melville option, where it was the three points of discussion with the resident. Then there was the discussion where your motion where we would just simply opt out, and then that would be it. And then an alternative would be that person opts out, and then that starts the consultation process.
Yes, but when you were answering Councillor Quinton's question, which of those 3 were you referring to?
Not sure I follow. I think we discussed all 3.
So when you did the workshop recently, which thank you, I was really impressed with, and I heard you saying then the intention was for us to provide an opt-out option after there had been numerous contact points with the community member already.
Yeah.
I have a question for you, because I know I spoke to you about this briefly the other day, in terms of what's currently proposed in this notice of motion and any concerns that you might have about what is presented.
No, I think if that motion went through as it is, we can work with that. I did note some of the potential issues with it in the officer comment, but if it went through as it appears, then that's the course that we could take.
Councillor Ganji and Councillor Hamilton.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just wondering, just noting the comments, so I'm just interested to see. So basically the way it's charged is divided by X and everybody pays Y. But that's still going to be the same regardless if you've got a small or big bin, correct? Because I'm just trying to work out with what your comments have suggested, that obviously 2 different sizes potentially means the different throw, but are we still going to do it across the board and it's divided by and that's how much you pay regardless of the size of the bin?
Yeah, and I guess that's kind of where I'm going with the officer comment. There's a lot of different ways that we can charge for our waste service. Some councils will just have a single fee and multiple different bin sizes, and they're happy with that. Others will have lots of different bin sizes and lots of different fees to reflect different options available.
Councillor Hamilton?
Okay. So this report that you were going to bring in February, I'm assuming that the reason it's not coming till February is because you're still collating information. Is that correct?
Correct.
Right, okay. So, I'm curious, obviously other councils wish to discourage the amount of waste that goes to landfill, so trying to move people down to smaller red litter bins is the ultimate aim. But I do acknowledge, I do take Councillor Wilson's point that bigger families and people with lots of waste may want a bigger bin or a second bin. I take all that point. But it seems to me that there's some inequality there. Would you agree that ratepayers who perhaps don't generate or generate very little waste going to landfill are to a degree subsidising other ratepayers who might be sending a massive amount of waste to landfill because it's averaged out across the board the way we are at the moment? Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. So if we are looking at, as per this proposal, that it is at cost, I'm just not entirely sure how that provides an equitable sort of service across the board for all the ratepayers that are having. If we're supplying a second bin to families or people who are generating 10 times more waste, and it's being charged out at a minimal rate, a cost rate,
this a question for me?
Sorry?
Is this a question for me?
I don't know, I'm thinking.
Okay, if it's not something you require
Okay,
an answer to.
it's just,
I'm
if
happy
we're
to
looking
answer
for
it.
an equitable system, have you come across a system thus far that provides an equitable
So
system?
I think Bryce has already answered that in his report, where he says careful consideration must be given to estimating, and then says he needs further information from the audits that are being done at the moment. So he's
Yep.
addressed that in his report.
Okay.
Okay, so Councillor Wilson has moved his motion. Is there a seconder? Councillor Quinton.
I would just like to make a small amendment to point 2, that this opt-out option will be included in a mail out to all households. However, I just feel like we need to specify that if someone does return with an opt-out option, that a communications plan with 3 or 4 steps to be brought back to council for approval, which wouldn't be till February now anyway. So I'm just wondering about your timing on this.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask questions of the mover at this point?
I'm happy to do with that as a request for an amendment.
Okay, so what's the amendment that you're proposing?
That a communications timeline be triggered should someone return an opt-out form after the mail out.
Councillor Wilson?
Yes, Your Worship, I am. And just more broadly, I sought to be as less restrictive as possible to allow staff the freedom to innovate around that, and I'm very happy for there to be 7 or 8 attempts at communication. I guess the relevant point for me was that it happened before delivery of bins rather than after delivery of bins, and any other innovations that staff might have, I'm very happy to accept.
Okay, so we've got a mover and a seconder. Councillor Hamilton will be against, I'm sure. So do we have would you like to speak to this?
Are you, or is someone speaking for you?
No, I have a question.
Yes.
Because, sorry, I'm probably tired and not forming my questions properly. I apologise for that. I'm concerned by your motion, obviously.
Okay, but you can do that in debate. Are you?
But what I want to know...
councillors, are we going to debate this or not?
Yeah, debate.
Okay, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Your Worship. So what I've attempted to do with this motion is to just resolve 3 points of uncertainty that have been a feature of the discussion of this over the past year. The first feature of uncertainty is whether or not we would be providing flexibility to people and in what form. So what I've sought to do is say, consistent, I believe, with advice that we've received from Bryce, to take an approach that says there is a default system which will be delivered to everyone's house unless someone takes active steps to opt out into a different configuration, which is what point 1 seeks to do, is to provide clarity around that, and also to say that that option be provided before the bins get delivered rather than after the bins get delivered. I appreciate that Melville chose to engage with residents after the bins were delivered. However, the conversations that I've had with several people involved in that process said that it was quite catastrophic in terms of public relations and public acceptance of the scheme, which was evident in the review of the scheme that was done. I believe that it makes far more sense to engage with the community while it's still a hypothetical proposition, rather than after the bins get delivered to their home. Point 2 says that it would be included in mail out, but I don't mean that to restrict in any way any other forms of communication that might be undertaken, that this would just be one of the ways that an opt-out be provided. And I'm very happy if staff, after having received a request for opt-out, then choose to engage in prolonged conversation about whether in fact it's necessary, whether it's desirable, whether they will need it, but that all of that happens prior to the bins being delivered. And at point 3, Councillor Hamilton, I hope this addresses some of your concerns. The wording is not intended to say that it only be at cost. It is in contrast to some of the other discussion that has been had in the past, which is that some form of penalty fee be created as a disincentive for people to have extra bins as a form of behavioural control through price mechanism. I believe that that would be unjust because it would put additional costs onto people with large households, people with young families. I absolutely accept that if somebody has a mostly empty bin, that they're paying the same as someone who has a full bin, and that gets averaged out across the community, but I don't think it necessarily follows that we should then have a penalty fee over and above what the cost would be for someone because of their circumstances who require a second bin. So if it's understood that what I mean is that we keep the existing type of fee structure which we currently have for people who are currently able to get a second bin under our existing arrangements.
Just pause for a moment. Do you want, I'm not sure what you're saying, so maybe
and also I took an amendment that said that the word residents gets replaced with ratepayers as well.
in both point 1 and 2?
Yes. That the intention was always that it be ratepayers, not residents, and that it may have been a typo at my end, which I said to correct now.
I just wanted to clarify, Councillor Wilson,
Yes.
in respect to point 1, you talk about a large general waste bin or a second general waste bin, and whether 3 should also replicate that same statement, provision of a larger general waste bin or second general waste bin.
Yes, and just to clarify, my intention was not to say that it must provide both options. It was to provide flexibility as to whichever was most expedient, either having a larger one or having a
I
second
think
one.
what she's saying for consistency,
Yes.
including in point 3 or a second general waste bin. Is that what you're...
That's correct.
Yeah.
And I'm also happy for that to read charged in line with current pricing arrangements for additional bins, if that provides more clarity and certainty.
Point 3.
The point 3 would say that the provision of either a larger or second bin.
Ratepayers who choose to opt out of the smaller general waste bin will be charged. Is that where we're at?
Who opt out of the smaller general waste bin be charged a fee in accordance with current pricing mechanisms for determining the cost of an additional bin or something along those lines. Does that provide more clarity?
Really? It changes it. Can
Can
I just
someone
clarify?
read it out?
So Councillor Wilson just said in line with current pricing
Well-
schedule. I'm not even sure what our current pricing schedule is based on, so that to me throws a whole...
I withdraw and then instead just say the provision of the larger bin or second bin.
Okay. Amy, could you maybe read out what you have, please?
Yeah, I don't think it's right, but I'll read it out. So I have moved Councillor Wilson, seconded Councillor Quinton, that Council resolves that the FOGO bin system rollout will include the following features. 1, ratepayers of the town will be provided with the option to opt out of the default small general waste bin in favour of having either a large general waste bin or a second general waste bin prior to delivery of the new FOGO bin system at their residence. 2, this opt-out option will be included in a mail-out to all households. 3, that a communications timeline be triggered should someone return an opt-out form in the mail-out. 4, which one's 3? Ratepayers who choose to opt out of the smaller general waste bin will be charged a fee no greater than cost recovery for the provision of the larger bin.
Or second, yes.
Can I, so it's been pointed out that this could potentially be misinterpreted when we're saying either a large general waste or a second general waste bin by a community member, and potentially better wording would be in favour of, that's not even right.
I have a question while you're...
As to be determined. Yes.
Yes, thank you. Just wondering, I just don't know why. it's one or the other to me. I didn't pick this up before.
It's because it hasn't been determined yet.
No. I'm talking about, so you get a pissy little bin, or you get two pissy little bins, or you get a big bin. Why wouldn't the option just be to get a little bin or a big bin?
Because I wanted to give discretion to staff, or give staff discretion to determine whether it was better and cheaper for the town to either provide two bins or to provide a larger bin. I was not preempting which of those two options was.
So the ratepayers don't get a choice if they want two little bins or one?
Well, potentially. So Bryce, maybe you can speak to this and say to councillors. Your report in February will address those issues and make a recommendation on which option would be preferred?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
And I'm happy for that. And happy to take the advice of staff as to which of those two options is better.
Okay, Amy, are you comfortable? You've got...
well, all I have at the moment on the end of that point is that or second bin. So
or a second general waste bin.
Or second general waste bin.
Okay, so everyone's happy. We've had Councillor Wilson move, Councillor Quinton second with the amendment about the communications plan. Is there
have me against?
Okay, so Councillor Wilson, would you like to speak? Oh,
Who
you've
has
already
spoken?
spoken. Councillor Quinton, we're up
Thank
to
you very much.
speaking.
I've just gone through my notes of when Mark Geisler presented to us on the 29th of October. And something that I have written here is that 80% of the community want to do the right thing. That leaves 20%. So this enables us now to have a conversation from the very beginning, before a bin rocks up on their verge, to have a very concerted conversation, 3 or 4 or 5 different times, in order for them to say, "Oh, I don't want a new bin." Well, let's have a conversation about that. We are now able to speak to those 20% because our contamination rate is still at 14.5% for our recyclables. We are still sending 72.7% of our waste to landfill. If we contaminate our green bin, that will go to landfill. This is what the main impetus of FOGO, of having a 3-bin system, is to stop contamination and to divert waste from landfill. So this will enable us now to have that conversation before these people get this bin. Once they get this bin, there will be an emotive response for them. I don't want a bin. I don't care about your program. I'm just going to throw whatever I want in whatever bin I want. Now they're going to have an option. And it is an option to say, you know what, I don't want a bin. All right, Bryce, with his gorgeous face, is going to rock up at their house and go, you know what, I reckon we could have a conversation about waste in your bin, and here's why. Waste to landfill, it's going to cost you more money to have a landfill levy. It's also going to cost you more money to have another bin. So when we have that conversation, we can go and have a look through their bin, and Bryce can get his gloves on and he can take everything out and tip it all over their verge and, you know, have their waste and go, look at all your waste. Wouldn't you like to be part of a solution to reduce waste, to reduce your landfill levy, and to do a good thing for our community, for the whole community? And I agree with Councillor Wilson, we need to do this before the bin rocks up on their verge. We need to start from day dot. And once Bryce gets his report at the end of February, we can already have started to have those conversations with people. This is a good thing. We're going to do this right, and we're going to do it in a way that doesn't divide our community. It is going to bring the community with us.
Thank you. Before Councillor Hamilton speaks, I just have another question for Bryce. I think I heard you say in our workshop that these things were all going to happen pretty much anyway. I just note in your report you're saying that it's not supported, and then I heard you say earlier that it wouldn't be a problem. Can you just help me understand where it's actually at? Because I think you're doing a fantastic job, but I need to be clear on what your position is on this.
Yeah, I think in not supporting the notice of motion that Councillor Wilson's put forward, what I'm suggesting is there's some other information that Council might want to be aware of and have at hand to make a decision about the particular bin sizes and associated fees and charges with those, and whether or not they want to consider them all together at one time.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton?
Okay.
I'm not particularly adverse to what Councillor Wilson is putting forward. I just think it's a teensy bit premature in that the officers are still collating information, in that a report is going to come back to us in February, in that the rollout's not going to happen until July. So I'm not entirely sure why this needs to be voted on now. I think that basically, in principle, these things are probably okay, but I would like to have the information at my fingertips first before I nail these down and say yes to all 3 or 4 dot points now, isn't it? The confusion in the conversation around this table tonight has convinced me that this is premature. If we didn't have such confusion around the table, if we were also completely fixed on what we were doing, I would go, okay. But no, that's not the case. Everybody around here has been a little bit confused tonight by this conversation. So I'm thinking that that tells me straight away that we don't have all the facts at our fingertips, and I would like to see those facts first from our staff.
So speaker for the motion, Councillor Gadger.
Thank you, Your Worship. Call me a size queen if you will, but I like my big bin. I very rarely use my big bin, I have to say, but I feel like it's actually it's convenient for a bigger bin supplied. I'm happy to pay more for that, and I appreciate the potential opportunity of being able to do that prior to me being given a substantially smaller bin. Also, the other morning when I put my near empty bin out on the road verge, a neighbour across the road was utilising the spare space in the bin for some of his leftover rubbish. So I don't have an issue with that, and I think in relation to costings, I think I'm a perfect example. I may literally have 1 bag of rubbish that goes in my bin a week, but then so therefore I'm not huge on the cost that it's taking, that I'm contributing back to the ratepayers with the size of the truck. So it's not like my bin is completely chockers each and every week. Therefore, I think it actually balances out in the end with those that potentially are. So I'm comfortable with that. And now that I understand that you're either going to be given the option, not 2 options, but one option to have 1 bigger bin or an option to have 2 littler bins, I'm hoping it's the bigger bin, then I'm quite comfortable. I thought we were giving, in the motion, giving ratepayers the option of having 1 big bin or 2 little bins, but we're clearly not going to be doing that. We're going to have a standard procedure that we set out with that will come back in February, which will be people can retain the current size bin they've got, or they'll be able to have 2 smaller bins depending on which option the council goes for. So very happy, and I think it's very smart to actually include this as a mail out to all residents. It's a massive change. You need to get it directly in their eyes so they are aware that it is coming, and they have then the option prior to something just being lobbed on them and saying, well, never knew about this, what's going on here, where's my convenience gone? So happy to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor William.
Yeah, back before, in a previous life, before becoming a councillor, I was part of a group that was consulted on FOGO, and the group comprised of a good cross-section of the town of Bassendean from different areas and different age groups, etc. When we discussed the FOGO concept and the introduction of it, we're very clear that it needed to be an opt-in, opt-out thing, that you couldn't just lower the boom on people and say, that's it. So I think that, you know, in the spirit of that opt-in, opt-out sense, that really people do need to have that opportunity up front, and that they do need to be able to have the time to, you know, then be perhaps consulted further, to maybe some of them will be won over and some of them won't. But it sort of makes them, it gives them an opportunity to be part of a solution, and to actually, if they do find solutions, to share it with their neighbours who are also stuck in that I don't want to do this sort of thing. There are older people who might struggle with it, people with disabilities who might struggle with it, people who don't have very much room because they're in little units who might struggle with bins or numbers of bins, or think that they're going to when they're not really going to. So I think that, I'm basically speaking in support of the motion.
Thank you.
Councillor Wilson.
Any other speakers? Councillor Buddy?
Just for fun. Thank you, Your Worship. Just from the outset, I'd like to point out that I'm absolutely in favour of the sentiments behind this motion. However, given the size, scope and importance of the FOGO rollout, I would like to afford our officer the opportunity to present to Council in February as intended before we make any lasting decisions about how we move forward. That being said, I do support the sentiments behind the motion. However, I cannot support the motion at this time because I feel that the information presented by the officer will be treasure rather than trash.
Thank you. I'd just like to speak briefly. I don't actually know why we're even debating this. I think we've very clearly had a very well-informed presentation from Bryce just recently, where these things were all discussed. It was very clear that as a group of councillors, we were wanting to provide an opt-out option, that we were going to consult in advance of that, so not consult, inform in advance of that, so people knew what they were basing their decision on. We talked about having the option of a bigger bin. I think Bryce has done a really fantastic job. I think we need to be conscious of the fact that, as Councillor Barty said, this is a really big project. We have new councillors who don't have the same level of background as the rest of us who've been involved more for a longer period of time. There was an enormous amount of confusion here tonight. That disturbed me, and I'm often surprised how there are aspects that people still haven't understood, even though we've had ongoing conversations. We've been told we're having a report coming in February. I don't have a problem with any of these sentiments. I'm just not sure why we are discussing it now when our staff have said that they're going to bring us back all the information in February. Bryce is obviously trying to be very accommodating, but he's clearly said that it's not supported because there's all this other information. Even the fact that our new councillor is saying, I don't have all the information, I think that is enough of an argument for the rest of us to say, okay, let's just wait until February as planned and make the decision then. So I'm going to vote against it, not because I disagree with any of the items here, but just based on the fact that we need to provide all of our councillors the opportunity to have the adequate information to make an informed decision, and I don't want to deny that of any of my fellow councillors. Thank you. Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Worship. Why now? Because these 3 points have been the subject of differences of opinion, and I think it is important to provide clarity to the staff so that when they're preparing their report in February, these particular items, which have been the subject of a difference of opinion, are resolved. And the confusion that there may have been at the table today will be nothing compared to the confusion in our community if we deliver them a small bin and then attempt to engage them in a conversation after it's been delivered. Her Worship shakes her head, but Her Worship will also be cognisant that we've received advice at this table from staff saying that we would be ready for a rollout of FOGO in November, as in a month ago. We have received all sorts of advice in the past. By providing our staff with clarity on these 3 points that have been the subject of some debate, we will provide staff the opportunity to go away and do all of the extra work in the certainty that it is not going to be the subject of contentious debate in February. Councillor Hamilton suggested that it might be premature. I would remind Councillor Hamilton of the FOGO implementation plan that the MRC has produced, which says that the education program is supposed to already be operative in December. One of the reasons why it is not currently operative is because there is still uncertainty from our member council and Bayswater's member council about what that configuration is going to be. We need to resolve that uncertainty so that the educators have a very clear understanding of what message they're going to take to the community, and we need to do that last month. That is why I propose that we have this discussion now. It would certainly be disastrous if we were still debating the nuances of this in February and attempting to do a rollout on the 1st of July. I'd like to thank Councillor Quinton and other councillors who have spoken in support of this motion for their understanding about the need to engage with our community while it's still a hypothetical proposition rather than after they've received a bin and they are confused as to why it's not being collected in the second week. And for all of those reasons, I recommend the motion to council.
Thank you. Okay, so putting that to the vote. All those in favour? Councillor Wilson, Quinton, Ganchel and McWilliam. Against is Councillor Barty, Hamilton and McLennan, so that is carried. 11.3 is the notice of motion from Councillor Hamilton about alternate formats for the Bassendean Visual Arts Award. Questions?
You go.
Thank you, Worship. So I remember when we had the sculptures down by Sandy Beach Reserve. I remember going along to it. But I note in the officer's report that there was some concerns around securing the art and making sure it wasn't stolen or vandalised. I was just wondering if you wanted to reflect on those observations.
Okay, I brought this for, I have actually canvassed this idea a couple of times over the last year or so and felt that we weren't ready to look at this. And you'll note that I put long timelines in here as well because we're probably still not ready in many respects. However, Bayswater at the moment are reviewing their art exhibition and how they do their annual art exhibition. So I thought, well, if Bayswater are doing that at this time, perhaps it's an opportunity for our staff to engage with Bayswater to see if there's any synergies between the two organisations. Because I noted at the last art exhibition that we had in Bassendean, it was hot, it was sweaty, it was crowded, there was no seating for people with bad backs or elderly. It was
Councillor Hamilton,
really...
are you answering Councillor Wilson's question,
Yep.
or are you debating your motion?
I'm just saying that, you know, this is an opportunity for us to see if City of Bayswater and Bassendean...
So I think his question was related to whether the items, there'd been consideration to whether they'd be damaged or stolen. Is that correct, Councillor Wilson?
Yes, in relation to the point one mainly.
Yeah. Okay, well, the fact is that there are outdoor sculpture exhibitions in various parts, like Cottesloe. Is it Cottesloe?
Cottesloe, yes.
Yeah, Cottesloe. There's one in Sydney as well. As you know, you've just mentioned there used to be one down at Sandy Beach. I actually never had the privilege of going to one of those, so I don't know what that was like. I do believe that we have an opportunity to explore some different ways of doing this. It even occurred to me...
Councillor Hamilton, are you debating your motion?
Shush, I'm sorry. I'm really not with it today. Apologies. Anyway.
Thank you for the answer.
Councillor Quinton, do you have a question?
Yeah, this is going to be very unfair because none of the staff here for when we did our culture and arts plan, but perhaps if anyone has read it, can remember if outdoor sculptures was raised as something that the community want as part of that plan.
Would have to follow that up.
Right, yeah, so we don't, so there's lots of things, let's just have a workshop. I don't think we need to commit to anything tonight, but, you know, it feels to me like there's a lot of things that we could flesh out because we don't know.
Councillor Hamilton, would you be happy if this was deferred to a workshop?
I actually, I read the officer's response. And you know what? We're never going to get anywhere because basically it's saying here a master plan. Yet again, a master plan. You know, how many times have we said we don't want a master plan? So I'm actually withdrawing it.
Okay.
Because I'm not going to get a positive response from the expressions.
Well, maybe we can have a conversation because I think there's the intention to...
I don't think you should bother.
So I know that the staff have been working on the implementation of their current cultural art, whatever it's called, what's it called? Cultural Arts Plan, and so there would be a good opportunity then to have a conversation around this at that time. Councillor Gadget?
Yes, just for councillors' reference, just with the previous sculptures by the river that we did conduct, the piece just directly outside here was actually purchased through that process.
Thank you. Okay, item 12, any announcements for the next meeting? So So we'll move on to item 13. Do I have a mover to go behind closed doors? Councillor Wilson moved, seconded. Councillor Barty. All those in favour? Carried unanimous.